Thank you. I'm happy to be here today to present the budget for the Wyoming Attorney General's office. As you know, when folks think about the Attorney General's office, they often think about the law office, which is part of the Attorney General's office, but we have additional units within the Attorney General's office that will be included in our budget today. We have DCI, we have the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy, we have police officer standards and training, we have the Division of Victim Services, and we have the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. And if you'll indulge me, I brought the folks that are the director of all those operating units within our budget with me in case they are able to answer questions that I'm not, and that's highly likely. But I would just have them at least raise their hand so I can tell you who is here with us. From the law office, I have my Chief Deputy, Ryan Shellhaas. From DCI, I have the Director of DCI, Ronnie Jones. From the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy, I have Director Chuck Bain. He is with us here down from Douglas today. From Post, I have Director Chris Walsh, also down from Douglas here today. From Victim Services, I have Director Kara Chambers here with us. And from the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, I have Director Bowler, Shannon Bowler, who runs that unit for us.
Welcome.
They will, and next to me, I have my trusty fiscal officer, Steve Winders, who will also try to keep me out of trouble here today. With that, I would just, I intended to go through the budget page by page. That is what we did last year. Unit by unit is what I mean when I say page by page. And I will speak about our exception requests when they come up within that unit, if that is acceptable to you, Madam Chair.
It is. If you could start with exceptions, if you could do that, but if you're not prepared, you don't need to.
No, I could do that if that's how you would prefer to take it.
Committee, would you prefer to take it by exceptions first?
Yeah.
Raise your hands if you do.
Yes.
Go page by page.
Let me then just get this page out of here so I have it in my mind. So if you would like me to start with exceptions, then our first exception.
You don't need to. You can go page by page.
Oh.
The majority of the committee would like you to go through it at the time.
Okay.
Co-chairman likes to see the exceptions first. Knows what to fight about.
I'm in quite the quandary here because
No, you're fine.
but I will go unit by unit, but I will try to do so judiciously
Great.
and quickly. How about that?
Thank you.
I would just mention too, before I get to that, just because I feel like I need to say it as publicly as I can, that I'm very proud of my staff and the work that they do all throughout the Attorney General's office. It's been a few hard years, you know. We're recovering from the pandemic. We are experiencing vacancies all over the office, not just in the law office, and they've done a tremendous job. And I just want to compliment them, both to you and to the people listening in, that they've done a tremendous job. And we have experienced successes this year in all the things that we do. And I wanted to start with that. And with that, I will get to our first unit. Our first unit is Unit 101. This is our law office. The table and the pages I will reference will be the table. So the table for that is on page 22. Our law office houses obviously our legal office that consists of 5 divisions: our Human Services Division, our Civil Division, our Criminal Division, our Tort Division, and our Water and Natural Resources Division. So obviously the law office is taking care of all the representation of the state law office and all the legal work for the state of Wyoming. We do have an exception request within this unit. The first request, and this is one that you have heard me refer to before as cleanup. And so this is our priority number 15 on our exception list. And by cleanup, what I mean, it is something we are doing already through a B11, and we're now looking to make that permanent. In this instance, this is to make position 10630 a permanent position. The amount is $261,350. That's for salary and benefits. And what this position is funded with workers' compensation funds. This is one of the attorneys that we have up in our Casper office working on workers' compensation cases. We like having some of those attorneys up in Casper. That puts us closer to the Casper branch of the Workforce Services Office and allows us to interface with Casper doctors and the folks in Casper to service a different part of the state. That is our.
Co-chair, I used to do that job a long time ago.
Paid you too much.
So that is our exception request in Unit 101, as I mentioned, mostly cleanup. I will move on to the next unit then. The next unit is our Unit 101, which is, the table for that is on page 27. This is also the law office. We call this Unit Fund 492. And so this unit has a total budget of $576,322. This is set off from the rest of the law office just to add transparency and accounting for the legal work that we do for boards and commissions. So as you know, the state has various licensing boards and commissions. Those folks are generally funded by the fees that they charge their licensees. They then pay us for the legal work that we do for them. So this money is funded from revenue for 50% of the interest earned on the amount of money that they have in their investments. And that funds the attorneys that represent boards and commissions. We have no exception requests in this unit. Next up would be Unit 103. This is our Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. The table for that is on page 30. This unit has a total budget of $1,250,379. Now, this unit is mandated by federal law. It's to investigate and prosecute fraud in the state's Medicaid program. They also investigate alleged abuse at Medicaid-funded facilities. And so generally, we're looking for and investigating and prosecuting any instances of fraud within the Medicaid system or folks financially abusing the Medicaid system. We have no exception requests within this unit. I would move on then to Unit 115. This is our,
Representative Larson.
Is that split 50-50 on the revenue, state and federal then, or?
this is, Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, this is a 25 or a 75,
25.
So there's a state match of 25%.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Please proceed.
Next then would be our school finance litigation unit. The table for that would be on page 34. Our total funding request in this unit is $1,861,524. Generally, this is the unit charged with assisting in maintaining the constitutionality of Wyoming's education funding system. We advise various entities. We advise the governor. This is the one area where we advise the legislature as well in terms of funding the system. We advise the superintendent, the Department of Education, school facilities. As you're all probably well aware, the Wyoming Education Association did sue the state of Wyoming over school funding, believing that it's inadequate and that it is constitutionally inadequate.
So questions, first of all, just give us a quick update of where we are.
Yes, Madam Chairwoman. Co-Chair Nicholas.
We can go into executive session if necessary.
I was going to talk in generalities if
Yeah.
that's acceptable. We're in the discovery phase right now. And so we're right in the middle of depositions this week, and next week we'll have depositions. We will have additional depositions coming up in January.
So I noticed, and my understanding is that they were contemplating taking the deposition of Matt Walmer, our staff member. What's the status of that?
Madam Chairwoman, Co-Chair Nicholas, I believe we are still working out the details related to that. I know that LSO and the legislature would like to assert some privilege related to the testimony that LSO staff could provide related to you, mainly legislative privilege. And so I believe us to still be working out the details, but I will confirm that.
Well, I guess my point is, Bridget, that we want to know how that progresses.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, are your liaison, are you working with, is anyone particular in management council on, how are you keeping the legislature abreast of the status of that?
Madam Chairwoman, co-representative or co-chair Nicholas, we generally work through LSO. So we keep your staff updated, but then it would be management council, but then it would also be joint education on occasion.
Mr.
So
Clausen,
primarily management council and your staff.
So just another question on this. So we authorized funds for outside counsel to assist. And are you using that outside counsel, or are they acting involved in the day-to-day litigation and depositions going on?
Yes, yes. In fact, they will be conducting some of the depositions out in Rock Springs this week. And then we handle some of the depositions as well, but we're very much intertwined and working together. So yes, they are working actively on this case.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman, Mr. Clausen does provide regular updates, I think, to leadership of the legislature and then to some members of management council. So I think, we can certainly get an update for this committee if this committee is concerned, and it would be my recommendation that any of those updates occur during executive session. Even high-level processes, I think, are prudent to do in executive session.
And so then the 350,000, is that enough? Have you
Madam
expended any of the 750 that we provided before?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Nicholas, we do believe the 350 to be enough, but we do need it in addition. As you'll recall, we were back here. We were here last year for a supplemental request for the 750. We have started to dip into that. We believe we need the additional 350, which is the exception request here, because since that time, we have had additional school districts intervene in this case. And so that increased the number of depositions we were going to have to take and the number of claims we're going to have to defend. So it is our assessment that 350 currently will be enough to get us well into this litigation. I want to be very clear that is not to promise you that I may not be back again. I believe this will be enough, but depending on how the litigation proceeds and if there are appeals, and then if we ever had to go back to the district court again, we may need to seek additional funds. But currently, we believe the 350, in addition to the 750 you gave us in the supplemental, that would be enough to
Okay.
adequately defend this. And as you well know, this is a tremendously important topic. I know that's why you're asking about it. That could lead to the expenditure of hundreds of millions of dollars of state funds. And that's why we want to make sure we're adequately prepared to defend this case.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Representative Sherwood?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this update. And I think to piggyback on a question that's already been asked, what is the balance of that 750 that was allocated? And then can you help me understand why the 350 would be on ongoing request instead of one time? Thank you.
Ms.
Madam
Hill?
Chair, Representative Sherwood, the balance currently is $380,000 roughly. I've rounded that number. And why this would be an ongoing request would be, again, to have that money available in the event that this litigation proceeds longer than we think it will. Obviously, if we don't spend that money, it does revert.
Representative Sherwood, follow up? Representative Larson?
I do. So the way the governor has it there is this would be ongoing and go into your standard budget.
Madam Chairwoman.
And so for each year, we would show this 350,000 in your budget. And that's the intent rather than we need it for this specific litigation one time.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, that is correct.
Okay.
Now, what has happened in the past, And it's been years since this has happened, but we did essentially amp up, for lack of a better term, the amount of money we had while litigation was ongoing. And if you'll recall, I want to say 7 or so years ago, I'm not going to get that number exactly right. You then reduce that amount through an exception request, noting that we didn't have litigation ongoing and that amount was reduced. And so I think the same principle is what we're going for here.
All right, any additional questions on the school funding litigation? All right, thank you, Ms. Hill. Please proceed.
Yes, our next unit then would be our unit 117. And our table for that is on page 37. This is our tobacco unit. The total budget for this unit is $740,972. This unit accounts for essentially the funds that we received from the tobacco master settlement. And the requirements of this unit are both statutory and contractual. That was us entering into the tobacco master settlement, which was between tobacco manufacturers and most states. And in agreeing to that, we implemented some statutory requirements requiring what we would call diligent enforcement of our tobacco laws for those folks that did not join the tobacco master settlement. And this unit accounts for that and the work that we do there, primarily diligent enforcement of the statutes, our tobacco statutes. If we are found not to be diligently enforcing those, the potential risk is that we would lose our tobacco master settlement accounts for the year. And there have been challenges to that over the years. Those funds actually fund the health costs associated with smoking. There are no exceptions requests within this unit.
Senator Guru?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question on that, on 37. So I just heard you describe it. You've got 2 authorized employees on this budget. And it just jumps out at me of $30,000 travel, out-of-state travel.
Can
Can you
you
help with that?
repeat that, Senator Guru? I think.
I'm sorry, I apologize. You have $30,000 in line items, 2 employees for out-of-state travel. It's 15,000 ahead. I was just wondering where that, it just seems a little bit odd.
Madam Chair, Senator, so in our diligent enforcement, a lot of what we do is interface with the other states also diligently enforcing the master settlement agreement. There are a lot of conferences associated with that from other attorney general offices, and those are almost all out of state. And so we do send our attorneys to all work together. I actually think this works really well in terms of working together with the other states to make sure that each state is diligently enforcing that, so everybody is getting their funds from the settlement account. May I say this? Is it fair to note that that seems like a high amount of out-of-state travel? Yes, that's fair, but this is one unit where we experiencing that more than almost any other unit.
And fun fact committee, smoking tobacco is considered a protected class in Wyoming, despite my efforts to repeal it. You can't receive any kind of adverse employment action for being a tobacco smoker. Fun fact, please proceed. Ms.
Thank
Hill.
you. Our next unit then would be our unit 130. The table for this unit is on page 41. This is our consumer protection unit. The total budget request in this unit is $787,597. This unit enforces the consumer protection laws of the state, and it is funded with consumer protection funds. You'll know that we have the consumer protection account. When we're talking about consumer protection laws, we're thinking about false advertising, phone solicitations, pyramid schemes. This unit also includes, because we recently passed a law related to tightening up some of our antitrust laws. and our consumer protection unit focuses on that as well. And so we're involved in a lot of suits. This would be the unit, you've heard a lot about opioids. Our opioid litigation has gone through this unit as well. We have no exception requests in this unit.
Senator Guru?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just want to make sure I understood it right. You were talking about fraud, then you talking about securities fraud and that kind of fraud as well?
Ms. Hill?
Madam Chairwoman, generally not securities fraud, but we do look at antitrust behavior on the state level. So what we would be looking at would be, one, and it's been in the paper, so I'm not spilling any attorney-client secrets here. When we talk about antitrust, it would be also working with the SEC on the Kroger-Albertson is one that's merger. And so we look at that from the perspective of state antitrust laws, and is there a violation related to that?
Follow up?
Follow-up.
Thank you. I was just wondering, but yesterday we had the Secretary of State in and he talked a bit about, had a budget request for securities fraud and talked expansively about that. So I was just wondering if you work together with that office in this realm at all?
Madam Chairwoman,
Ms. Hill?
we have been looking to work with the Secretary of State's office, not specifically to securities law. We would if it called for that. But one of the things we're looking at with the Secretary of State's office would be, as you know, the filings related to LLCs and some of the ways that people are able to take advantage of our filing laws here and then use that to defraud people. And so we do work with our consumer protection unit and that aspect of the law.
So Ms. Hill, we recently updated that antitrust legislation, right? That antitrust law?
Correct.
Wonder who the sponsor was of that?
Madam Chair, I believe it was you.
And the Medicaid Fraud Control Act as well. More fun facts. Go ahead, Ms. Hill.
Our next unit then is Unit 133. This unit accounts for, and the total budget, sorry, the page number is 43 for this. The total budget request is $13,046. This unit simply accounts for what we call the Steiger Fellowship grant from the American Bar Association. And what we use these funds with is to hire summer interns, their first year law student summer interns, to get them interested in the area of consumer protection. And we're usually able to hire 3 summer interns with that money and hopefully encourage them to practice in the area of consumer protection. But that is from a grant from the American Bar Association. We have no exception requests within that unit. Our next unit would be on page 45. This is our unit 140. This is our Medicaid health reimbursables. And the amount of our budget request in this unit is $785,901. This account is different from the law office. Obviously, our attorneys are working in the law office, but this is accounted for separately for transparency. But to let folks know that this account is funded from Medicaid funds. And what it funds is 2 attorneys and 1 paralegal doing exclusively then Medicaid work. And this is not the same as our Medicaid fraud. What the folks in this unit are doing would be working to help determine eligibility, provider recovery, benefit recovery. And so we have no exception requests within this unit, but it is accounted for separate from our law office, but the people operating there obviously are housed within our law office.
Ms. Hill, do you happen to know how much they've been able to recover in recent years? I know there are some big numbers.
Madam Chairwoman, we do have some big numbers, and I heard that number recently, but I let it fall out of my head. I'm going to send you and the committee an email after this. They do a really good job of recovering those funds back to the Medicaid system. So the number is not fresh in my head, but we do a very good job of recovering.
Representative Larson?
I was just wondering, Director or Attorney General Hill, on that, so you show the source of funding through the Department of Health, but you said it was federal funds. Normally we have a federal funds and it's listed there. And so I'm trying to determine, can you clarify that for me a little bit, just why that is is so,
Ms. Hill?
Well, Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, because they reimburse us from that, but the source of funding to them is federal funds.
okay, thank you. So this is a reimbursement.
Yes, I should have been clearer with that, but it's a
you.
reimbursement from them, but the source of their funding is the federal funds. Next up would be our Unit 199. The table for this is on page 47. This unit was added recently just to add some, again, transparency here. The total amount of this request is $322,594. This accounts for the direct appropriation that we receive from the school foundation account, and it funds 1 1/3 attorneys that represent the Department of Education. And the reason we needed additional transparency was on this account was any amounts that revert from this revert to LSO for recalibration. So the funding from this that is not utilized by my office reverts to LSO, and there'd been many questions about what that funding would be. So it was determined that we would put this in a separate unit so people could see what that was. So it's new. If you've been on the committee before, you've not seen this unit, but that is what that is. We have no exception requests in this unit. That would finish us off in the law office, and I'd like to move on to DCI if there are no questions in the law office.
Any questions on the law office? Going once, going twice? All right, let's go to DCI.
All right, on to DCI. So DCI has 3 main units. We call it Operations, the Crime Lab, and CGIS. And so then we have some additional units here accounting for grants. The first one would be Operations. We call it it's called Criminal Investigations in your book. It starts on page 58. We call it Operations. They are the folks responsible for statewide criminal investigations. Now, primarily, those are drug trafficking investigations, but we also, when requested and in appropriate circumstances, investigate traditional crimes. The total budget in this unit is $15,469,198. We do have 3 exception requests within this budget. The first would be exception request number 7. This is, and if you want the narrative for this, this is on page 53. This is a request to increase our funding for maintenance of the Wyoming Crime Statistics Reporting Program, and our request is $88,580. And what this is by statute, law enforcement is required to submit criminal statistics information to DCI. And then by statute, DCI is required to make that information publicly available. This system, the Wyoming Crime Statistics Reporting Program, is a system that we use that allows us to fulfill both of those obligations. We also report that information to the FBI as an important requirement, or a requirement of important grant funding from the FBI that you will see later on that funds some of our operations within DCI. And this system is nearing the end of its maintenance agreement. And so we need this amount to allow us to maintain or pay the annual maintenance for this system. If we don't, we will be unable to comply with FBI reporting and additionally comply with the state statutes requiring us to report this data. And if we were unable to report to the FBI, we would lose important grant funding. But I could answer.
Madam Chairman.
And maybe Ronnie will join me, because may I say, you heard today that lawyers don't do math. They don't do tech very well either. So if it's a tech related question, Director Jones is going to join me for that.
Representative Stiff.
Madam Chair, Madam Attorney General, I did have a question about the narrative on page 49. In the second paragraph, it begins with from 2016 to 2022. the first sentence says that from 2016 to 2022, DCI experienced a steady workload increase in all three sections, operations, CJIS, and the crime lab. The next sentence says that DCI experienced a 5% decrease in criminal cases between 2016 and 2022. And so I just wanted to get your comment of how do those two sentences go together? Because the first sentence says the workload increased and the next sentence says the workload went down. So
Madam
So-
Chairwoman, Representative Stith, I think because the first sentence is adding them all together, whereas the second sentence parses out criminal investigations. So some of the workload that we saw a tremendous increase in would be both CJIS, so that's Criminal Justice Information Systems, and I'll talk about that a lot more in some of our exception requests when we get to CJIS, and then also the crime lab. So some of our criminal investigations went down, but as a whole, then our workload did increase.
Right. Ms. Hill, I doubt that you know this, but maybe the director knows. Are all 23 counties now fully on board with NIBRS?
Madam Chairwoman, I believe Ronnie would be able to add more color. I think we have done a tremendous job in getting them much closer, but I believe we have a couple of stragglers still. But I'll let Ronnie add further color to that.
Director?
Madam Chair, I would agree with that. We've spent a tremendous amount of time in our CJIS section.
A little bit closer to the mic.
Traveling around the state, providing training to local agencies on how to use the system, how to submit that information to us. We have seen some success in getting more agencies online, but not all agencies at this time are reporting.
Can you tell me which agencies are not online?
No, I cannot tell you off the top of my head, but if that's information you'd like, I could certainly gather it and provide it to the committee.
They're required by federal law to be online, correct?
Yes.
And your office is spending significant amount of time and resources trying to get them online, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And they receive local dollars, which you probably don't know about, but from this committee, correct?
I do not know about that.
We will need that list of all of those agencies that are non-compliant with federal law.
Okay.
Please proceed.
All right, that was a request number 7. As I mentioned, we had 3 exception requests within this unit. The next would be our priority number 12. This is for increased subscription and support costs. We added it together for an amount of $9,649. If you want the narrative for this, it starts on page 54. I'll try to just speak briefly about these. We just wanted to add them together for one total amount for ease in accounting. But basically, DCI uses a whole host of software and services to help us, obviously, with all our operations and to complete the work of this unit. Multiple vendors have increased their subscription costs, which I'm sure you will hear a lot about during this whole budget cycle. We've added those together. Generally, the ones that we were talking about would be Leads Online subscription. That is an information gathering tool that allows us to pick up essentially secondhand transactions. That's transactions from pawn shops, scrap yards. That helps obviously with criminal investigations. The next would be National Criminal Justice Association membership. That one keeps us up to date on news and information regarding criminal justice and kind of trends that you're seeing in criminal investigations. And they also interface with Congress related to funding for criminal justice type projects. We have Police One, which is a web-based platform for police training, which actually is great because this is online and it saves us costs in terms of travel and per diem. We have Trax, which allows us to analyze cell phone records, great for criminal investigations. We have the Consolidated Lead Evaluation and Reporting System. Again, that's a system that looks quickly at public record searches from various data sources. We have Accurate, which helps us identify people and their assets. Again, very important for criminal investigations. And RIMS, which is the Records Information Management System, which houses multiple reports. All of the costs related to using these services have gone up When you add that all together, it is the amount of our exception request. Our next exception request then would be our priority number 15. And this would be to increase our reimbursement for task force officers. This is in the amount of $144,000. As you may or may not know, well, DCI has various task forces around the state and or regional enforcement teams around the state. And we have task force officers serving on those teams. Those task force officers come from local law enforcement. So think sheriff's offices or local police forces. Since the beginning of the concept of these task forces,
Ms. Hill, there's a question.
I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Okay. All right.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just didn't see you out of the corner of my eye. So since we began this program, we have reimbursed those local entities, so either the sheriff's office or the local PD's office, the amount for the salary of these folks serving on our task force officers. But that amount has always been $42,000. Since the beginning of this program, obviously the salary for these local law enforcement has gone up. And currently the average salary that we're seeing for local law enforcement, folks in sheriff's office or PD's office, is $65,000. And so we're only reimbursing for $42,000 plus overtime. That's not enough to cover their salary. We want to encourage those people to still engage in the task force program because we see it as a very important force multiplier for us, and it allows us to engage with locals and have better criminal investigations. And so what the amount of this request then would be to allow us to reimburse at the rate of $60,000 for the folks participating on the task force, and that is a total of $144,000.
Representative Zwana, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Attorney Hill, I believe you answered my question because I was going to ask why we have an average salary of 65,000 and you're only putting it up to 60,000, but that is your intent. Your intent is not to get it up to the average. Your just intent is to get it close enough that you get that participation.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Zwana, sir, that is correct.
Thank you.
And because that was an average around the state, for some folks, the 60,000 might actually be their full salary. And we were just trying to pick a number that was the average around the state. We think the 60,000 will still encourage the participation.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Trying to fully understand these employees. They work for say the Cheyenne Police Department, just using a hypothetical here. And they also do additional duties serving on the task force. So why does the state need to pay or reimburse almost the entirety of their salary instead of having it be a partnership with the employing agency, for example, the Cheyenne Police Department, if that's the example we're using? Or is their work solely task force related?
Madam Chair,
Ms. Hill.
Representative Walters, at the time they're assigned to the task force, their work becomes solely task force work. So entities do sometimes change maybe the task force officers, but during the time that they're assigned to the task force, and that's their primary duties, it is task force duties. Follow up?
Follow up, if I may. So then benefits, are the benefits requirement of the local law enforcement entity, or are they part of this overall salary proposal?
Madam Chairwoman, we let them sort that out with their local entity. So their benefits and their salary are paid by their local entity. And we just set the reimbursement rate at the 60,000, which covers primarily their salary.
It's an effective program. All right, keep going.
All right, next then, that would be the end of the exception requests within operations. That will move us to our Unit 302, our crime lab. We do have exception requests within this unit as well, but the crime lab is exactly what you would think it would be. It's taking care of, it is the only accredited crime lab in the state. So law enforcement all over this state sends their requests to us for both forensic services, also manner of testing. So think fingerprints, firearm marks, drug chemistry, toxicology, biology. That's all being done in the state crime lab. Our total budget request in this unit is $6,780,542. The table for that is on page 65. Our exception request within the crime lab would be to cover, we have the one request here. It's our priority number 8, and it would be to cover increases in crime lab costs. And the amount is $48,363. So there have been increases in 4 areas of the costs associated with running the lab. Again, we added them together for you, much as we did our subscriptions costs to come up with the 48,000. If you want the narrative on that, it's on page 62. I'll talk about them briefly. One would be our Waters mass spectrometer service agreement. We very much need that to have minimal downtime for our 2 instruments there. And so the cost of that has increased. That instrument is used primarily for confirmatory drug analysis. The next would be our Qualtrics document manager. This maintains our control documents in the lab. Excuse me. And so that the fee for that management system has also increased. The next would be our National Accreditation Board accreditation, which is required for some of our federal grants that we receive. And it allows us access to the FBI's CODIS system. So that's your combined DNA index system. You have to have this accreditation to use that system. That cost has increased. And then the last would be our gas headspace instrument service agreement. And this instrument is used generally to test blood alcohol for DUI cases. Again, all of that from around the state is getting sent to our lab. And that's our exception request within this unit. There's no questions?
Representative Sherwood.
Thank you. Just based on what we've heard from other agencies, pros and cons on like the timeline on a service agreement, have you looked at whether it would save money to do a multi-year service agreement with these providers? Thank you.
Whoever can answer.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Sherwood, you know, we haven't actually. What we've looked at is the service agreement that they have offered to us, and this would be to get us through the biennium with that service agreement. But noting your question, we'll take a look in that, and if we can certainly get it cheaper, we would. And then any funds that were left over obviously would revert. Next unit would be, if there were no further questions, our next unit would be our Unit 303. The table for this starts on page 77. This is what we call CJIS, but that stands for Criminal Justice Information Systems. And the total budget request for this unit is $7,151,337. This unit takes care of all of our criminal justice information systems. So that is a lot of computerized systems. It includes things such as criminal history, which we've spoke about a little bit, but it also includes automated biometric identification, uniform crime reporting, concealed firearms, sex offender registration, and applicant tracking. So there are a lot of computer systems within this unit and a lot going on within this unit related to information. We do have 5 exception requests within this unit.
Representative Larson.
In your source of funding, you've got publications, sales, 162,000. What's that generated off? What is it that is it information that we sell, or what what's in that? Yeah.
Just water. Just
Yeah,
water.
yeah.
After the
Generally, Madam Chair, Representative Larson, it would be the fees that we charge folks for certain background checks.
Okay,
or like the fingerprint cards or concealed firearm permits. So there are certain fees being charged, and that is the source of that funding.
thank you.
So if there were no further questions, I can get to our first exception request. The exception request narrative for this one is 69, is page 69. This is our #1 priority, and this is our VMware environment storage array. So this one's going to be techie, and Director Jones is here to correct anything that I might not say accurately because it's very technical related. But our request is 465,407. So generally, my understanding, high level understanding of this is 6 years ago, we consolidated 50 servers into 8 virtual servers, with each virtual server capable of housing multiple servers that were previously hard drive servers. But the virtual servers do not have hard drive units. And so, or storage devices, but we still needed some of that. And so ETS had recommended to us that we purchase a 3-par storage array device. Now that consists of some of the storage we need and the actual hard drives that would be in addition to the virtual hard drives that we're using now. And so we did that, and that has worked very well for us. It's configured in a way that that makes sure we don't have data loss, such that we're not able to operate. So if one of them goes down, it's configured in a way that it can use a different server. So this piece of equipment is coming to the end of its useful life, and we are going to have to replace it. So ETS has recommended to us a new device, and the amount you see in our exception request is for the cost of this new device. And then the initial cost of the annual fee of using this, the annual maintenance for this device. It's important to note that all DCI operations utilize this system. So that would be both all of the lab, the criminal justice information system, and investigations. And so it's very important to DCI operations, but it includes things such as our RIMS that I talked about. It includes our ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children, uses this system as well. So CODIS uses this. It's very important to all the operations of DCI, which is why it's our #1 priority. There would be, if this device fails and we don't have another one, it would impact all areas of DCI. Now, if you need more tech information than that, I present Director Jones if there are questions related to the tech of it all.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that was the question I was going to ask you, General. This is your #1 priority?
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Salazar, that is correct. This is our #1 priority for the whole agency, the Attorney General's office, not just DCI, the whole agency.
Why is that?
Because of the true impact it would have to DCI if we didn't have this. The DCI, all of DCI relies on this piece of equipment to operate. The whole of DCI would go down. Operations, Crime Lab, and CJIS would not be able to operate without this.
Thanks.
So what do you anticipate the transition period, switching over, the implementation?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Nicholas, Director Jones has been working with ETS, so if I may
Sure.
see if he can answer the question.
Madam Chairman, Co-Chair Nicholas, well, if we were appropriated the funds to purchase this, we would work with ETS immediately. The end of life on the current hardware that we have is June of 2026. Of course, there's a process that we would have to go through to get the equipment ordered and then get it scheduled to be put online. There would be a lot of data migration that we would have to plan for with a number of vendors, but it would be a project that we would start on immediately.
And so just to follow, and so this price is for all of that, the work entailed in doing the migration and then having testing the system, all those type of things.
Madam, no, that is not correct. This is the price for the piece of equipment itself. We would have additional costs to vendors who we would have to pay to help migrate the data from this system to the new system. ETS would be involved, with that. So this cost would be the cost only for the hardware.
Do you have an estimated cost of, the full cost of the completion and transfer to the server?
Director?
Thank you. Sort of. This is going to come up in another exception request down the road here, but we have had conversations with a vendor who manages our YCRIS system, which houses all of our criminal history information. They have estimated that their cost of helping to migrate that could be between $100,000 and $175,000. So that's a very rough estimate of additional charges, which is why we will be asking for additional funding in another exception request.
And so is there any emergent need to do this? I mean, the current system's working fine and
Madam Chair.
Director?
Co-Chair Nicholas, if we get to June of 2026, I would say yes, it would be urgent. The reason we're asking for it now is because that is in the next biennium. That June 2026 is end of life for the current system, and we would not be able to get maintenance and support with our current system. So if it were to fail and we didn't have a new one, it would be, it just would be devastating to the whole agency.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You want to challenge that one more time?
I want to understand it. That's all.
He just doesn't want those speeding ticket records.
True.
Right. Keep going.
If there's no more questions on that one, I could move to our next exception request. This is our priority number 2. The narrative of this is on page 71. This is our Wyoming Criminal History Repository. The amount of our request is $100,000. This is a custom-built internet program that houses our computerized criminal history system. So that includes our concealed firearm permits and applicant tracking. It includes things, and when we talk about applicant tracking, we're talking about warrants, stalking and protection orders, and it's used by law enforcement around the state. And it's really important to them in all aspects, but one thing I would want to point out is they use this system for initial contact, which is really important in terms of safety for our law enforcement officers, having that up to date. So this system is maintained by the vendor who built the system, and the cost is going up because when statutes are changed by the legislature, we have to change the system. And that would include statutes changed both at the state level and at the federal level. So when there's additional crimes or when there's additional things that we do background checks for or additional requirements, we have to change the system to go with it. And so the cost for that has increased due to statutory changes, and we're looking to be able to implement those changes for the $100,000. Additionally, because it interfaces with federal systems, when they change their policies, both their security policies and the information that they require from us and the information they're willing to get us, we have to change that system as well. And so there is the increased cost to change the system from our vendor.
What's the current maintenance fee or ongoing maintenance fees?
So hang on one second, Madam Chairwoman.
Sure.
You know, I'm not sure. Do you know the current maintenance fee, Ronnie? Ronnie, Director Jones knows.
Director?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. We entered into a 10-year contract with the vendor. The vendor's name now is Innova. At the time, it was AIC, but we entered into a 10-year contract with them in 2016. And we pay them per hour that they work on our system. So it's $140 per hour that we pay, or that we pay them. And as Attorney General Hill stated, as new laws are passed, new FBIC security policies are passed, updates to systems occur, whether it's internally or with systems that this system talks with. All of those things create challenges that we have to go to Innova and say, we need you to make this work. And so we pay them $140 an hour for their service according to that contract.
And so the 50,000 a year is kind of a swag of what you expect to pay in maintenance and service upgrades.
Would you refer to it as a swag?
Madam Chairwoman, I wouldn't. I would refer to it as an estimate, though. That would be fair.
Okay.
Prefer that as well. Senator Salazar?
So I'm trying to understand this system because state statutes are not stagnant. I mean, we're always going to be changing state statutes. That was clearly, I assume, something that when the system was built, everyone knew was going to occur. How difficult is it to update it when there is a change? I understand the $140 an hour, but is that a major effort to simply update on a yearly basis? Is it the manpower hours that are increasing the costs? Help me out with that.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Salazar, I don't know if I would describe it as a major undertaking, but it is man hours, as you pinpoint. So they have to add new, and this is a Bridget term, I don't know if this would be the correct technical term, but modules to the system. And then, as Director Jones says, the way that the system communicates with our other system requires a certain amount of labor cost to do that. So I don't know if it's an arduous task, but it is a man-hour task. And as we change those systems, and again, the policies of the federal government, their security policies, we have to change that to be in compliance, to speak with their systems, technically speak with their systems. And it's a man-hour issue.
Isn't it fair to say that it has to do with the complexity of the statute change? Whether it be federal or state statute change, and then somebody has to go in and code that into the system and then have it integrate across all the systems. And so it's really, you're paying for professional services of a coder. Is that fair?
Madam Chairwoman, that would be entirely fair. They're man hours for doing that.
And the estimated time cost depends upon the complexity of the federal or state law change.
That would be fair as well, Madam Chairwoman.
All right, thanks. Continue.
Uh,
I'm sorry, Representative Sherwood?
Apologies there. Not to belabor this to death here, but do you have a succession plan in place? Your notes say that this is the only vendor who can make changes to the system. What happens if they aren't in existence any longer? Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Sherwood, we would have to find another vendor at this point in time because they custom built it for us. And we did recognize that all the years ago, that when they custom built it for us, we would have to look for additional systems or somebody else in the event they weren't able to, or in the event they increased our cost. So I asked the same question to DCI when we were talking about this exception request. So we are aware of additional systems out there. Currently, though, we are very happy with this vendor. And so we want to keep utilizing this vendor. We will keep our eye on that and think about what that might mean in the event the cost becomes prohibitive, right? Common principle, if they're the only one that could do it, is there the possibility of a cost increase you wouldn't want to bear? Currently, we don't believe that to be the case, but we will continue to keep our our eyes on whether there's better systems for us out there that we would want to switch to, or different vendors that we would want to switch to.
All right, please continue.
All right, that would bring us to our exception request priority number 5. The narrative for this is on page 72. This is our request for additional CJIS positions. And the amount of our request is $332,944. Since 2020, well, let me just explain again, and I think I did a little bit when I started with this unit, what CJIS does. In addition to housing all our criminal justice information systems, they are also the folks performing background checks and making sure our criminal history information systems are up to date. So since 2020, this relates to why we're asking for this. Since 2020, the legislature has passed 14 bills approving additional background checks, both for licensing and things such as gaming. And so every time that there's an additional reason to perform a background check, that goes to our CJIS. And so our CJIS unit is responsible for processing all of those. And our work since 2020 has increased 21%. This relates to your question, Representative Stiff, that I said I'd talk about later. This work has increased significantly. This work has increased 21%. And so with that, without additional people, our turnaround time for background checks has also increased. Prior to 2020, our turnaround time was 5 to 7 days on a background check. We're currently experiencing 15 to 20 day turnaround time, and we would expect that to increase if the legislature increases additional legislation for background checks. Now, what? Well, then maybe it would go down, Representative Nicholas. And when we talk about background checks, people often think of criminal background checks, but it's not just that. Some of the background checks you've approved would be things like K through 12 education, people to work in hospitals, schools, foster care. And so those are some of the background checks that you would want to be able to turn those around quickly because they're important industries. And so that time has increased from 5 to 7 days to 15 to 20. Additionally, in 2023, something that has also increased our work, the legislature passed a bill that allowed the Department of Correction to issue restorations of rights in certain instances, under certain conditions. And that includes firearm rights. So this is important because we track the firearm rights. And so when somebody goes to buy a firearm, right, the licensee does an instance check. So we need to be able to have our information within the Wyoming system for firearm rights accurate. So when somebody goes to buy a firearm and their firearm rights in Wyoming have been restored, that needs to reflect that. That has also increased our workload. And so we have asked for additional people to be able to maintain the time it takes us to do background checks, to be able to make sure we're accurately reflecting Wyoming. It's important to note that's Wyoming firearm rights. Federal firearm rights are something different. I know there's questions about that, but Wyoming firearm rights are tracked within our system. And so we wanted people to help us, additional 2 positions to help us maintain that workload or stay on top of that workload given the increase. I will note in here, we did request 2 positions. The governor's recommendation is only for 1. And so when I said the 332,944, that was our full amount of our request. It's basically half of that that the governor's office is recommending.
Co-chairman or Representative Larson, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So do you request, are these new positions or you're requesting the positions as well?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, yes, we would be requesting the positions as well. It's 2 additional CJIS positions we're requesting. And then could I just add, one of the costs in there was for a computer.
Right. I'm just trying to understand, the governor recommends approving, but he doesn't approve the position.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Hibbard?
the governor approved one position and the funding for one position. The request was for two positions.
Language approves the amount, but does that automatically mean that he approves the position?
Yes, I believe that if we would have added just a simple phrase at the end that I have in my notebook, I recommend approval of 164,000, the end of the sentence, and one FTE. That would have made it clear for you.
It would, yeah. And that's just what I was trying to clarify.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Salazar?
I guess I will ask it, Madam Chair. Thanks. So that program, I think, is being run by the Department of Corrections.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Salazar, if I can clarify, yes, they are the ones who have to issue the
Right.
certificate for the restoration of rights. But we are the keeper of the information system that it has to be entered into.
No,
Okay.
right. And what I was simply going to ask, General, is, so do you will there be a sharing of information so that we don't have to, duplicate stuff?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Salazar, yes, we are in communication with the Department of Corrections and trying to sort out how we'll share that information. And I think those conversations with them are going very well. We're also having, just FYI, because you may hear it from constituents, conversations with our federal counterparts, because there's restriction on federal firearm rights that are different from restrictions on Wyoming. And so we're working on those conversations too, to make sure we've got everything accurate in that system.
Further questions? All right, seeing none, please go ahead.
All right, the next then would be priority number 10. This is our message switch two-factor authentication, and the amount of this request is $45,200. So DCI is the designated Wyoming Control Terminal Agency for the FBI's NCIC. So that's the National Crime Information System. So what that means is we're the designated control terminal, but law enforcement around the state can use that system. And so criminal justice agencies around the state are able to use that system around the clock. So they have 24-hour access to that database. And so again, thinking of what information might be in that's criminal histories, that's warrants, that's protection orders, that's stalking orders, that's missing persons information. So it's very important for them to be able to access that.
Attorney General Hill, quick question
Oh, sure.
for the director. For those agencies not compliant with NIBRs, can they lose their access to NCIC? I think we'll gain compliance rapidly at that point.
Madam Chair, I don't know the answer to that question.
You might want to let them know that I asked it.
I will do that.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Matt? Wow, Madam Chair, I will say we haven't contemplated that, but we will let them know you asked. I think that's important. So what results in our request today is FBI. So this is using the FBI system. They recently updated its security requirements for use of their system, and it includes two-factor authentication. And it is required that we use two-factor authentication starting October of this year, and it's auditable by October of next year. So we need to make sure that we're in compliance with that, or they will shut off our access to that system. So our provider has created a method of two-factor authentication for every user, and it costs $10 per user annually. And we have 2,260 approved users of that system around the state. And so we're asking for the additional cost to cover that two-factor authentication to allow us to comply with the FBI's new security requirements. Now, it's important to note that we applied for a grant to pay for the initial costs of the system. And we did receive that grant. And so we are using that to pay for the initial cost. The amount in our exception request here today is for obviously the fee and the maintenance agreement.
Questions, committee?
There are none. I'll move on to our last exception request within this unit. This, as I said, was our biggest unit with exception requests, and this would be our exception request priority number 11. And this again is tech related. This one is our Cohesity maintenance for $50,000. So Cohesity is a network file storage system that ETS recommended we purchased in 2020 to lower the monthly costs associated with data storage. Now, if you'll recall, I've been talking about data storage for a long time, and I think the AG before me was talking about data storage at DCI. It's a phenomenal problem to tackle. They have tremendous amounts of data that we have to store. So you've got body cam footage, you've got crime lab information, you've got recreations of crime, you've got photos. So there's a tremendous amount of data storage. And it's been a significant issue for a long time. So ETS tried to help us with the solution, and their recommendation was that we purchase this equipment to help us with data storage, this system. And the system was brought online in December of 2021. And the nice thing I think to note was it cost originally $91,000 in February of 2021, but since its implementation, it saves us around $10,000 a month in data storage costs. So I do believe it to be working. And so what we need though, our support for this system and our maintenance for this system will expire in December of this year. So we're obviously seeking to renew. We see great value in this system in terms of one of the solutions for our data storage problem.
Representative Walter?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. To your point that it expires in December of 23, which is coming up here in just a few short days, and this budget won't be passed until end of February possibly. What's your plan to maintain continuity until the funding is actually available? And then secondly, the governor approves this ongoing, but he doesn't make it effective immediate. So these funds are technically not available till the 1st of July. So now you have a longer window of gap here. How's that going to be covered?
Madam Attorney General?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Walters, we will find the money within our budget to get us through to June, hoping that this exception request is approved. We do have a little flexibility in terms of other money we could use from other areas of our office, but we couldn't fund it on an ongoing basis if we don't have the exception request. So we believe we could get us through to June using other aspects of our budget. What did they say? Shake the couch cushions and see if we've got a little money in there to get us through to June.
All right, please continue.
Yes, then I will move on to the next unit even. The next unit is Unit 327. This unit.
Hold on, not so fast.
Oh, Madam Chairwoman, you said to move on.
Going once, going twice.
So
but no.
I do have a question. I'm looking at page 81, bottom of the page, on the cost allocation. And I see that it's $157,000. This is bottom of page 81, bottom of the graph, statewide cost allocation.
Mhm.
Madam Chair, 81? On my 81, I do not have anything. My 81 says no exception requests.
No, cost allocation line. Maybe I'm-
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
on page 81, you'll note on it's the third line on the bottom. Statewide cost allocation, SWCA, and it's 157,408. And this is the conversation that we had previously, that this is a target for reimbursement from the federal government with their either a direct or an indirect cost allocation. It's a target. This is the allowable cost that we calculated. It does not take any money away from them. It simply just says, this is the target.
So
And Madam Attorney General Hill, would you like Mr. Hibbard to repeat that?
Madam Chairwoman, I think I understood what it was. It is a target for our, yes, it's just my page 81 doesn't have the table. We're a little off there.
so I'm just, I mean, we have lots of these in the budget that come up, that the construction that we're trying to, the budget is trying to implement across the board. And my question is, for grants like this, the dollars that we use, typically do they provide some type of take a percentage or additional dollars for cost allocation to implement the programs, so that so when these are assessed or placed in by us, that's something that then is part of the grant process, funding process, that they reimburse us for those costs for the cost allocation that we establish.
Madam Chairwoman, Co-Chair Nicholas, generally, most grants have a certain amount of administration they allow you. And so and I'm speaking generally now, some grants are a little bit different, but they do allow you a certain amount of administrative costs, and we assess the cost allocation to that administrative cost. As long as we don't go above the amount for administration, then I believe we would be in compliance with the terms of the grant. That's me speaking generally of our grants.
And so that raises a question for me. Are there two assessments? I mean, you do a cost allocation for your operation or implementation of the grant. And then is there additional allocation by us?
Mr. Hibbard?
Or not additional, but just stacked?
Madam Chair, that's an excellent question. And I'm going to give an example outside of the AG's office, but applies to the AG's office as well. I'll just use the Department of Health. The process is that the Department of Health has a 3-year cycle on their indirect cost allocation arbitration with their federal cognizant agency, which happens to be our cognizant agency too, the Federal Office of Health and Human Services. They go through that administrative arbitration, and they establish a rate that they can bill the federal government. The state budget department does not bill the Department of Health like it would a special revenue agency. It relies on the arbitrated rate that the Department of Health has to make deposits into the general fund. That's similar to the AG. They do have administrative rate calculations and arbitrations, and they do make deposits into the general fund. This methodology of approach that we have in the budget is to establish a target. You heard AG Hill say, as long as we don't go beyond that. But let's say that we did go beyond. Let's say the Department of Health was supposed to bill $10 and they billed 11. Well, the next administration or arbitration of the rate, they would decrease that rate, allow $1 to flow back to the federal or not be billed in the next iteration. If they underbilled, the same thing applies. So in the next arbitration of that rate, they would arbitrate with the federal government and say, hey, we undercleared. Now we're going to increase our rate for the next 3-year cycle to make up for that difference. So these agencies that have those indirect cost allocations, this is how that applies. That's why this is using a revenue code, SWCA, because it's a target. We didn't take it out of their federal revenue streams because what they report here is exactly what they believe their federal revenue stream is. We're just providing a target for everybody to say, this is the reasonable allowable cost that you have available for your agency. And one of the most important things that's going on right now is we've got an influx of federal revenue. ARPA, is formula money. And every agency needs to be looking at how they bill that so they don't overclear, because the actual administrative cost is finite. It's the organizations, AG, they can include their administrative costs in their arbitration, and they get to include the statewide cost allocation in their arbitration as well, because those are administrative costs that are allowable by the feds. So in the case of this, what we're trying to do is say, let's be careful not to overbill. Let's establish a target for the other purpose. Let's have conversations to make sure that we are, in fact, collecting what we believe is allowable. So as we progress through this conversation with all the agencies, we'll establish this target, and then we can report upon it. Not just the state budget department can report upon that, but you and LSO, and we can start having a shared conversation about, are we in fact capturing the allowable costs that are available to us?
So Kevin, on that vein, what agencies have you met with to kind of describe this process and who are, functioning significantly on federal grant dollars?
Many. And we also had what we call the budget refresher, and LSO participated in budget refresher courses. A budget refresher course in the spring, we sit down in the state budget department, we have a conversation about particular things. Maybe it's the governor's instructions, but we had a statewide cost allocation conversation and a budget refresher course. And we brought that to, and there was 90, it averaged about 98 people participated in those conversations. So that was the first push on this. And then the larger agencies, naturally, I had conversations with directly. I do recall having a conversation with the AG's office about SWICAP and other scenarios. I had conversations with Department of Health, Department of Family Services, Department of Workforce Services, and other impacted agencies that I felt that might see a larger change in their statewide cost allocation. State parks would be an example of that. So yes, we broadcast loud and clear what our intentions were. We had many events to share that information, and we established this methodology. We have this target that we want to be able to work and collaborate with so that we can see that we are doing the best that we can together.
So my question then back to you, Bridget, is, so are you maximizing your allowable costs for the implementation of programs? And if so, if you aren't, then I think what the Department of the Budget saying is, give us the rest of it, but you aren't allocating or spending.
Madam Attorney General.
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, Co-Chair Nicholas. It would depend on the grant. So,
Yeah.
so I would say this, would it be our intent to maximize to the extent possible the administrative amounts we can use in our grants? Yes. We would want to make sure, obviously, we're complying with all of them. The only other thing we would want to take into account for this general concept is it better to have that money going directly to the cause for which the grant has been given you? So I'm thinking a little bit about some of our victim services ones. If it would be better to pass that money along to house people of domestic violence or some of those things, would you want to have a policy discussion about whether you should be maximizing your administration or whether you should be passing those dollars on to the causes for which you got the grant? And so I think that's a question you would want to have. But would it be our intent to alleviate pressure on the general fund to the best of our ability? Yes.
Or do you want to house domestic violence victims, Co-Chairman Nicholas?
No, that's why I bring up the question, because at some point, sometimes, as I understand it, some of the federal grants allow additional dollars in order to implement the grant dollars. And so it's a set amount that has to go or does go to the recipients or for the cause, and some don't. But where does that policy decision lie? Does it lie in your agency? Does it lie with the chief executive? And is there going to be consistency across state agencies on this particular issue? So.
Madam Attorney General Hill, if you can, based on
Yeah, I don't
thousands
know,
of grants.
Madam Chairwoman, I don't know that I have a firm answer, but what I would say is this, because we're all different, what I would hope is we could collaborate all together, budget, each agency, knowing what their grant is, knowing the policies behind those grants, and then have the final decision maybe made by the chief executive. And possibly including conversations with this branch of government who is responsible for looking after the general fund and allocating the general fund. So I
But
would
as you
hope
know, We like to decide everything.
Well, I would like to note, I didn't say that. What I said was collaboration amongst all.
Mr.
Okay,
Faber?
Kevin, sorry.
Madam Chairman, that's why I'm using the word target. This is not a push. It's not a shove. It's a target to see, are we looking at this reasonably, in a reasonable nature? And I'm also going to restate that the amount of administrative cost that comes from this YCAP is finite. We don't want to overbill, and we certainly don't want to underbill. But we want to represent a target for the agency to get the thought process in the right place to see that we are making those decisions correctly. It's a target.
Thank you.
Anyone else before we move on? We were moving on before. Do we get to move on now? All right, please proceed.
And actually, now I hope my pages aren't off, but it looks as if maybe they were. But the table was on page 82, and I think that's the table you had on your page 81. It was my justice assistance grant. The budget request is $1,927,568. I'll move a little faster through these with no exception requests, if that's okay.
Mhm.
That funds a whole host of criminal justice amounts. We have no exception, or programs, we have no exception request in there. Our next unit then would be Unit 329. This is our unit that accounts for our internet crimes against children. This budget request is $442,828. So the purpose of this unit is to identify, locate, and investigate child exploitation on a state, national, and global scale. This unit accounts for the federal grant to develop the software that allows us to do that, and allows us to achieve that mission. We do have an exception request in this one. This would be one of those ones that I call cleanup exception request. It's our priority number 16. We're seeking to make the 2 positions that we account for in this unit permanent. We have used the B11 process to have those positions there. So we're looking to make those permanent. There's no funding that goes with it. But it will be continued to be funded with the grants. that
So,
accounts in this
Madam
unit.
Co-Chair, my only question is how long has the program been in effect? And what happens if the grant goes away?
Madam Chairwoman, Co-Chair Nicholas, I don't think the program would go away. It's important to note that this one is in addition to the costs that we have in 301 operations. So ICAC is in 301. It's in operations. This grant funds additional. So if you're
Right.
saying, what if the
Well, I'm
software
sorry.
program goes away?
If the grant goes.
If the grant goes away, then we would have to seek other funding if you wanted us to continue that level of support for internet crimes against children.
Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a quick question, just for clarity. Do you include the crimes against children with domestic violence, or are they kept separate? Do you cover that? Do you budget for that under the victim services area or this?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Henderson, we don't put them with victim services per se. So when we're accounting for the investigation and our criminal justice attempts to stop the exploitation of children, that's in DCI. So that's in operations and it's in this unit. The victims, though, any assistance we would give to the victims of that would be accounted for in our victim services division. So if we're looking to help that person through a criminal justice, understanding that victim witness help, making them whole, that would all get accounted for in the victim services.
Anyway, 2 quick follow-ups. One, is there a place in your budget where you have accounted for the, I understand recently, talking with the local DA and the one in Casper, there's been an increase in crimes related to children and domestic violence and strangulation. Is that in your budget? Has there been an increase? Because I know a few years ago, there was a big decrease. And of course, I mean, I don't know what the history is of your agency over the last several years, but given the increase in the crime,
Is that in the budget? Is there a corresponding increase in the budget for that particular area?
Representative Henderson, are you asking as it relates to compensation for victims or crime investigations?
Kind of both, but more on the crime part of it in terms of, the follow-up.
Madam
The
Attorney General?
prosecution.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Henderson, no. If you're asking if I've accounted for that specifically within my budget, no. What my explanation for that would be obviously you ask us to prioritize what our budget exception request would be, and we are aware that there's an increase in ICAC. We chose to focus on CGIS this year.
Okay.
But additionally, the thing to note would be, except for the ICAC unit in the internet crimes against children, domestic violence situations and other types of crimes against children are initially investigated by local police officers. And so you would see the increase there first. Now, obviously, we can help them if they request that help from us. Our statutes work that way. If they request that help from us and seek our assistance with those types of investigations, then we can help with that. But you would see the increase there from local folks first.
So final question. Is there opportunity to have more conversation about this going up to the session?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Henderson, I believe you'll have additional conversations. We've had some conversations with joint judiciary, especially related to ICAC. They ended up not putting forth the bill that would have included additional ICAC positions. But it would be, I think, a topic of conversation that you will hear later in the session.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, next then would be our Unit 330. This is our, the unit that accounts for our high-intensity drug trafficking area. The amount of this request is $2,186,813. Again, this is accounting for a federal grant, which we have received approximately since 1999 with I-80 and I-25. Wyoming experiences a great deal of high-intensity drug trafficking, and this unit accounts for that, that grant that we use to combat that. We have no exception requests. Again, if you want me to slow down, but I was going to go a little faster with no exception requests. So next would be Unit 340. This is on my page 92. This is where we account for asset forfeiture. The amount of this request is $617,727. This obviously accounts for the property that is forfeit to the state for violations of Wyoming Controlled Substance Act, which is basically property that is used in drug crimes, or it is the proceeds that are violations of the Controlled Substances Act. We have no exception requests in this unit.
Madam Attorney General, do you have any estimated numbers of successful forfeitures?
Madam Chairwoman, we do report that annually to the legislature, and so I can get you that report. I don't have the number fresh in my head. We recently had a victory that was reported in the Wyoming Supreme Court and got to keep 75,000, but the amount would be much different than that. But let me find that report for you and get it to you so you have the actual dollar amount.
Another big positive information. Yep.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Representative Stiff?
I would also say in a great miscarriage of justice, I did have a drug mule client who was not able to keep the proceeds that were seized by the state, so.
My client did keep the proceeds, Representative Stiff.
I'm going to not comment
Go
on
ahead.
that. Our next unit would be our unit through 3121. This is our DNA enhancement program. The amount, again, my table is on page 94. The amount of this unit is 900,000. This unit just accounts for our DNA capacity enhancement or backlog reduction grant, which we have received since 2007. And this is designed to help DNA labs process more DNA and prevent backlogs. Next unit then would, no exception requests in that unit. The next unit would be Unit 3151. The table for that is on page 96. This is our Paul Coverdale grant. This is the amount of 583,301. This accounts for the grant that we've received since 2007. It is for forensic science improvement, and it's to make the turnaround times on forensic science better. And we have no exception requests within this unit. The next would be our Unit 3401. This is our Adam Walsh grant. This is an amount of $715,000. This accounts for grants, a grant that we have received since 2011, and it's for compliance with the Adam Walsh Child Protection Act and the Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act. Generally, we use it for supplies and for both DNA and fingerprints, and to make sure the information that we have in the sex offender registration is accurate. And so we verify that information with this grant. No exception requests in this one. The next would be our Unit 3411. This is our NCHIP grant. This is in the amount of $700,000. This is for Criminal History Improvement Program. We've received this grant since 2011. It's generally used to reduce violent crime and gun violence by improving criminal history records and making sure that those are accurate. And the main thing we do with it is make sure that criminal dispositions in that record are accurate. That's been a hassle. That's been quite the project to do, because all courts do it a little bit different, and how they enter the information is very different, and we want to make sure that's accurate. But that's what we use that grant for. No exception requests in that one either. I didn't know if that was ahead.
Is there a question? Anybody?
Pause, no. Okay. The next one then is 3,500. This is on my page again, 102. This is our Wyoming Office of Homeland Security grant. This is the information liaison officer. It's $50,000 is our budget request in this unit. This is funding from Homeland Security to fund an officer to achieve National Fusion Center assessment standards, which is basically used for information gathering and sharing, and helping us understand how we can better gather information and share information across both law enforcement agencies and then Homeland Security, because there is some fusion there, as the Fusion Center would indicate, that you would want to be sharing that information appropriately, but then also accurately. So each mission can be accomplished. No exception requests in this unit. The last one in DCI is Unit 3901. This is our sex offender registration grant. This unit accounts for the collection of the statutorily required fees for sex offender registration under Wyoming statute. The amount of the budget request in this unit is $282,485. We have no exception requests in this unit. Next, if there are no questions, I would move on to the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy. And I will go quick through these two, not to suggest the academy is not very important, but we have no exception requests from the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy. Congratulations, Director Bain. So go to CapCon? I don't have CapCon. CapCon will be a couple days later with y'all, and Director Bain interfaces with them. If you do have questions, though, he is available for those questions. So I will just go quickly. Unit 501 is our main unit to account for the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy. Our budget request in this unit is $5,874,179. So as you know, the Academy provides legislatively mandated basic training courses for law enforcement personnel around the state. This unit accounts for that. They do a tremendous job with very little people, and a facility that is falling apart, which you will hear about in a couple days.
Representative Larson.
They provide that training. The local law enforcement agencies are not required to reimburse or pay any fees.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, it depends on parts of the fees. As you will see from the later units that we include in here, so the ammunition, the food, that stuff we're buying at cost and billing to the agency, but the training itself is cost-free.
Thank you.
All right. And so that was Unit 501, no exception requests in that unit. And then these units account for other things happening at the Law Enforcement Academy. They're very much like enterprise accounts. It allows us to take both the revenue and then the expenses of them. So Unit 504 would be the canteen. The table that I have that table on page 110. That's 76,054. And the canteen is basically supplies that folks use for basic training, so workout clothes, but then also merchandise. Some people like to have merchandise there. We buy that at cost, and then we resell it to the folks attending basic training or anybody who wanted a certain amount of paraphernalia from the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy. No exception requests within that unit. Next would be 505. Which is same sort of thing, but this is for advanced training. The budget for this one is 590,130. So we're allowed statutorily, so the difference between this is advanced training, the one we don't charge for is basic training. This is advanced training, and statutorily we're allowed to charge folks that want to come to the Law Enforcement Academy for advanced training, and this allows us to account for that.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Larson?
Thank you. But as I look at your fund, I see that it's slowly dwindling. Would that suggest that perhaps there needs to be an adjustment in fees, or what are we?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, we don't believe so at this
Okay.
time. We believe that this fund is adequate to cover that. We are keeping our eye on it because I know you don't want us to get to a perilous situation at the end and then come to you in a panic. But we believe that that this would account for what we need to in advanced training,
Thank you.
both receiving the income and passing along the costs.
Okay.
Next would be Unit 506. That is our pre-service account, same sort of thing. Pre-service, if you're wondering what that is, we're allowed by statute to allow folks other than law enforcement to attend trainings if they so desire to come to those. They can attend the training. They're not law enforcement, but we obviously charge them the cost with that. This unit accounts for people who want to attend that, both the cost and then the expense. The budget request in this unit is 32,594. No exception requests. Next would be Unit 507. This is our facility usage by statute. My table for this is on page 123. We're allowed again to, by statute, to allow other governmental agencies to use the facility, use the academy itself for trainings or whatever they might do. For a while, folks that went to the state fair used the facilities. So this unit again allows us to account for the revenue we receive by charging them and then the expenses for allowing them to use the facility. No exceptions requests within that unit. Next would be Unit 508. My table for that is on page 127. This unit accounts for what we would call frangible ammunition. The amount of our budget request in this unit, 271,621. Prior to 2012, this goes along with your question, Representative Larson, about charging. Prior to 2012, we provided the ammunition for basic training. During the 2012 budget cuts, it was determined that we would charge the agency that sent their law enforcement officer there for the ammunition, but we buy it because we have economies of scale and we can get that at a better cost, and then we charge the people for using it. This unit accounts for that, both the purchase and the use of that ammunition, and we have no exception requests in that unit. Next would be Unit 509, food and supply. 244,458 is our budget request for this unit. My table is on page 131. And same sort of thing, prior to 2016, we provided the food and supplies for folks attending basic training. But during the 2016 budget cuts, it was determined that we would allocate that to the local agencies sending their folks to basic training. This unit allows us to, again, account for the cost of that and the costs that we recoup for that. And that would be the end of the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy. I could move on to post, if that is acceptable to you.
Please do.
Post would be our police officer standard and training. My table for that is on page 137. The total budget request is $555,443. Post is responsible for ensuring the quality and training of all certified police officers, detention officers, correction officers, dispatchers, and coroners. And they establish and enforce standards and maintain the certification files for all the police officers of the state and all the ones that I just listed. We do have 2 exception requests within this unit. The first would be our number 3 exception priority, and this is for our Acadis software. It's in the amount of $108,684. Now, we purchased this software from a previous YDOT grant that we received, and the software was developed in looking at several other states and how they track their police officer certifications. And this software is really helpful to us because we only have 2 employees within our post unit. And what it does, it would allow people around the state to review and update their records online for their police certifications. And we have 5,900 people using this system. And we have used a B11 to pay for this system in the past. And we would like to now make it a permanent part of the budget. In terms of permanent part, it would go to the general fund. It is a repository. This software is a repository for all the police officer standards, their certification records, and we keep them there. And hence our exception request to stop using a B11 process for this and make it part of our standard budget.
Co-chairman?
Thank you. So my question is, have you evaluated whether or not this is the place to do it? Can it integrate to any other programs, or are there other programs out there that are, I mean, have you done the analysis?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Nicholas, we have looked at a few other programs to see if they would be useful to us, but we would then have to buy the new program, whereas we have this program already in existence. And so this would be for our annual subscription cost, and we believe it's more cost effective to maintain this program. But just like our other ones, we would keep our eye on whether those costs become prohibitive.
What about,
We do-
what about integrating it to any of your other current software programs? Pardon me.
We did look at that a little bit when we originally determined whether we were going to, so it would be fair to say that's been some years ago. But when we were first exploring what system we would want to use, we did look at that and did not believe it integrated very well with those systems. In part because a lot of our systems that would be probably the best fit are over in our DCI and their criminal justice systems, whereas this is more of a keeping the certifications for police officers. And so they just didn't integrate really well. I would be happy to take another look at that though, and see if there's something that we could do cost-wise related to that.
Okay, thank you.
But it has been some years since we've taken a look at that. That would be fair to say. If there's no further questions on that one, I can explain our next exception request would be our exception request priority number 9. And this would be to replace post-test funding from the funding mechanism we used before to the general fund. So it looks like a 0 in the table for exception requests because it isn't an increase in funding, but it would be a move of 49,000 approximately dollars to the general fund. So I think you've heard me speak about this before, and this is me speaking about it again. Historically, Post generated income from providing an entry-level test that is not statutorily required. But what the entry-level test did was allow local law enforcement entities to send people to take this test. And if they passed the test, they could hire them immediately, and then they would get some extra time for basic training. And so it provided them with an option for hiring. The fees that were generated from that test were used to cover our 200 series in Post. The interest in the test has waned almost entirely, in part because the test is outdated and folks just don't use it anymore. And so we are not collecting enough funding from the test to cover our 200 series costs. So for instance, in 2022, 38 tests were taken, which generated $1,330 is all that generated. That is not enough to cover our 200 costs in 200 series costs in post. So it's insufficient. We don't, because the test is not mandated, we cannot force people to take it, and we don't see those fees going up anytime soon. We did look at modernizing our test, possibly with an online test, seeing if that would generate interest. But what we found was any fees that we would generate for more interest in an online test would likely be paid to the vendor for that test. So again, it would not generate revenue sufficient to cover our 200 series costs. So we are looking again to make this a switch from the revenue from this test, because it's insufficient, to the general fund. That's an amount of $49,000 hit to the general fund. Again, in here, it looks like a zero request, prior exception request.
One time it was making
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Nicholas, I am given to understand in the early days, pre-Bridget, that it did make enough money to cover the 200 series costs, but it has been years since that has been so. Again, we've been covering it with some B11s and some other costs from our budget, and we just don't see that as a long-term solution.
Thank you.
Any additional requests?
Madam Chairman,
Senator Anderson?
I have a question on your page 134, I guess in my book, request by object code. Every item has a negative and a positive down through there, and then you come out at the bottom with 49,000. It looks to me like it's zero. I don't see the 49,000.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Anderson, that's correct. That's what I was trying to say. It will look like that ends up as a zero request. I just wanted to say the 49,000 would be a hit, for lack of a better term, to the general fund, because we would be moving it from the testing fund, which doesn't generate that revenue, to the general fund. I just wanted to highlight, you are absolutely correct. It looks like a zero request because we're offsetting the test to the general fund. I just wanted to note, because I know you're very conscientious about the general fund, that's the amount of cost that would move to the general fund.
So, Madam
That is
Chair,
accurate.
Go, Chairman.
So what that, because it hasn't been generating that revenue recently, that means those costs have been borne by you or been going back to the general fund anyway?
Madam Chairwoman, Co-Representative Nicholas, or Co-Chair, you're not Co-Chair Nicholas. Yes, they've been borne primarily through forfeiture funds. But as you know, I firmly believe forfeiture funds should not be a source of funding for ongoing costs, because you just don't know what those will be from year to year. So we've used the B11 process to use forfeiture funds
So
to
that's
pay
the-
for that.
So all this does is not allow the B11s through the forfeiture process.
Correct. It would make it a standard part of our budget to pay for what is a standard cost in our budget, the 200 series.
How much revenue do you generate from the forfeiture funds?
Again, I was going to get that, Co-Chair Nicholas, I was going to get that number for you. We do report it every year to the legislature. I just don't have the number in my head
Okay.
right now.
Please proceed.
That ends our post. We're now on to victim services. Again, we have very few exception requests, so if it's okay with you, I will talk quickly through these. But
Please
we
do.
have a few. First would be our 901, Unit 901. Thank you, Director Chambers. This is our Victim Services Division surcharge account. The budget request is $4,966,878. I have that on page 145, the table for that. This unit accounts for the state's share of the VOCA compensation payments, which is victims of crime. We have no formal match here. It's not a 75-25, but it's important to note that our federal funding is based on the amount of the state expenditures from the prior 2 years. And so we use this fund, the state expenditures determine how much federal funding we will get later. We do have an exception request within this unit, and the exception request is to move the victim service administrator's salary from the surcharge account to the general fund. Again, this looks like a zero amount, but if you're talking in terms of dollar move to the general fund, it's $335,029. And the reason we're making this request now is we want to note again for you, the surcharge account, and I think we've noted it in years past, continues to decline. The revenue that we experience in the surcharge account continues to decline. And the source of revenue for that is surcharges on criminal dispositions and victim restitution. That continues to decline. And we are seeing a significant decline in that. So for 2020, our amount of revenue was 2.2. I'm going to round those numbers, if that's all right. 2.2.
Madam Co-Chair.
Mhm.
So, and the reason for the revenue decline is, are there less fines being paid or less offenses?
You know, Madam Chairwoman, Co-Chair Nicholas, I would say it's a combination of several factors. It would be less fines. It would be less courts ordering victim restitution. Interestingly enough, what you see out there is a movement to, at the federal level, and I'm worried it would trickle down to the state level as well, a movement to not include surcharge amounts on criminal offenses, because there's some question about the constitutionality related to that. And so I do think you see some of that revenue declining because of those feelings. And certainly it is true as well, you have less criminal convictions since the pandemic.
Well, and so my question is, if there's less criminal convictions and less surcharges, theoretically, you wouldn't need as much money in the victim fund.
Madam
I
Chairwoman.
mean, proportionately, by numbers,
Proportionally,
not to where it goes. Yeah.
proportionally, that makes some sense. I will note, though, too, some of the costs are increasing to providing the services that we provide to victims now. And so the pressure has been decreasing revenues, but also increasing costs. So your point is well taken, but we are still experiencing increasing costs related to providing the services that we provide to victims. And so our request is to move this amount to the general fund to alleviate the pressure on the surcharge account, to allow us to use that money instead for essentially administration to use it for the services we would provide to victims.
Representative Larson?
Chance that we get any of the federal funds that we get on this allow you to have administrative fees that could be used?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson's, yes, we do use some administrative fees.
To cover
To
this
cover
position?
some, you were asking for our federal grants, yes. She could provide more details if you would.
Director
like.
Chambers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Larson. If your question is, do we take an administrative proportion from our federal grant? Yes. Is that used for salary? No. We pass through as much as we can through to the programs. If you recall from prior testimony, my division is more than 90% pass through to programs, directly to victim service providers and or victims.
Fair enough,
So-
but the question remains, could you use some of the federal grant dollars to offset the costs associated with this position?
Ms. Chambers?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, that is allowable under the grant. It would have to be prorated across several of our funding streams, as I couldn't probably, because I touch all of them. And so that would be quite onerous, but allowable.
Could we maybe get an idea of what that is?
Sir?
And a follow-up on that, I don't see a cost allocation on this particular.
Mr. Hibbard, cost allocation, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the part 2 of the statewide cost allocation. We've been talking about the federal allowable costs and the revenue source SWICAT and the budget. We also went through all of the statewide cost allocation. And if you'll see in this budget center on page 144, you will see cost allocation, and you will see that we have $373,213 in there for the cost allocation that is allowable for this budget center. The part two of this conversation is that we consolidated HR and we advised you that we were going to cost allocate. And we repeat that again. We consolidated HR and we said that we would fund HR with general funds and we would then cost allocate HR across the enterprise, which we have done. We also had the conversation about examples of the Thyra Thompson building and the cost allocation as well, which we've exercised. There's archives, auditor, treasurer, public funds, budget department, facilities, HR, risk, purchasing, central mail. Attorney General's office is not billed directly by the Attorney General's office, ETS, within the allowable cost for the statewide cost allocation. We go through a really large exercise to do the statewide cost allocation. And then what it does is it apportions that fairly to where the centers are. And if it was a federal grant, we use that revenue code statewide cost allocation. If it is a special revenue source, then it is in the budget with the intent to bill those agencies. Example, the Department of Transportation. Last time I looked at, they were in excess of $10 million that they get cost allocated. Every agency receives that. So in this budget center, you will see the 373,213 that is driven by the allowable sources that we have. And to the point of this, if you look at this budget center on page 145, you'll see that there is 8.5 positions, which means there's a fair allocation for HR. And also to follow up on the previous conversation about the source of revenue for the positions, it's also in there as well. You can see on the top of page 144 that there is an allocation for positions, so therefore allocation for HR consolidation.
Thank you.
Any comments, Madam Attorney General?
No, ma'am.
All right. Ms. Chambers, any comments? No
None.
comments. All right. Please proceed.
All right. That would be the end of Unit 901. Next would be Unit 902. This is for DVS conferences. Our budget request in this unit is $97,784. My table is on page 151. DVS presents several large conferences each year. This unit allows us to collect registration and sponsor fees and then account for the costs of these conferences. The big one you could think of would be the Joint Symposium on Children and Youth Conference. No exception requests within that unit. Next would be Unit 906. My table for that is on page 154. This would be for our domestic violence and sexual assault unit. This amount is, our budget request is $4,952,671. We're charged with ensuring that there are services across the state for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and that would include stalking. This unit is used to provide funding to local nonprofits that specialize in that type of work. The expenditure covers the 25% match for the Violence Against Women Act grants and our 20% match for family violence prevention sexual assault grants. No exception requests within this unit. The next unit would be Unit 910. That is on my page 157. This is our victim witness funding. This amount of our budget request is $1,813,450. This DVS funds 31 victim witness service providers. The table's off. Oh, sorry, a page? So for your one page after me or one page in front of me? So what page is it? I'm on 157.
And what page are you on, Representative? I think
You're on 150 what?
Yeah.
158. So I'll start adding one page and hope that well, but on mine it is. I don't know where the hiccup went. Okay, so 158 for you. This is victim witness funding. This allows us to help of victims understand the criminal justice system process. And basically, again, we're administering grants to help with that process to local folks. No exception requests within that unit. Next would be our unit 915. I think it'll be on your page 161. This is our DVS administration. The budget request is 285,356. This is, again, for the administration of our DVS. It administers programs dedicated to serving victims of crime. This is mostly general fund in here, but we have a small amount of surcharge in here. No exception requests within this unit. Next unit would be 9001. This is our Family Violence Protection Act unit. The amount of our budget request, I think it will be on your page 165. 165? Well, something is, I'm going to stop telling you the page number then, because we're right between the middle. It's on my page 164. This was 1,577,037. It provides funding for emergency services for sheltering victims of family violence and their children. This is federal funds primarily, 95% pass through to local service providers, 5% for administration. So when we talked about using some administration for federal grants, Representative Larson, that's what we're talking about here. No exception requests. Next would be our unit 9002. This is our BOCA assistance grant. The amount of this request is 13,662,493. This accounts for our grant from the Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime, and we provide a variety of services to victims, victim services. And again, we're offering grants to local service providers, 95% pass through, 5% administration. The important thing to note here is there's no state match, but our sub-grantees are required to match this amount. No exception requests within this unit. Unit 9003, this is our BOCA compensation grant. The amount of this budget request is 1,095,411. This accounts for our crime victims compensation program, and this is generally to restore victims of crime to their pre-crime status to the best of our abilities, and that helps them with medical costs, wages, counseling, those sort of things. It's funded through fines and fees paid by offenders in federal court. 95% again pass through, 5% for administration. No exception requests within this unit. Next is unit 9004. This would be our Violence Against Women Act funding. The amount of this budget request is 1,731,456. This helps us fund domestic violence shelters and law enforcement efforts to increase awareness of the criminal justice system's awareness of their response to violence against women and help them do that perhaps better. This is again a 90% pass through to local providers, 10% administration, no exception requests within that unit. Next would be our unit 9006. This is for our sexual assault service program grant. This helps us to directly intervene for victims related to sexual assault and give them assistance to the best of our ability. Some of the things you would see as funding with this would be rape crisis centers, those types of things. Our amount of our budget request for this unit is 808,342. No exception requests. We're almost there. Next unit, unit 9007. This is our safe to tell unit. The budget request for this unit is $1,470,012. We do have an exception request within this unit. It is our number 6 priority, and it is our last exception request. Pursuant to a 2015 session law, the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security transfers money from their federal Homeland Security grant to Victim Services to establish a call center to accept information related to school and student safety. And then that call center was designed to disperse that information to the appropriate people, including maybe the school, law enforcement, family members. And so that's been operating since 2015. But since 2000, well, it was in 2015 session law, started operating in 2016. Since 2016, the Safe to Tell program utilized the Wyoming Highway Patrol Dispatch Center to serve as the call center for this, to receive the calls and then help us pass along the information to the appropriate folks. In the spring of 2023, we were informed that Wyoming Highway Patrol can no longer provide that service to us. And
Representative Larson?
my understanding, and Director Chambers could add color to this, but it's a lot to do with their capacity. As you know, they're experiencing vacancies out at Highway Patrol as well as many agencies in the state are. It would be their capacity to handle those calls and disperse them appropriately. I will see if Ms. Chambers would.
So follow up, Madam Chairman. So then this is kind of a standalone stand-up, or are you going to put it out where the Highway Patrol was doing it and use their facilities? How do you envision this?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, we've already begun searching. I've put Kara in charge of that, and so I would let her add the details if that's acceptable to you.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, yes, we've put this out to bid. We have a successful bidder and we intend to go under contract in January.
Coach,
Mr.
so
Co-Chairman?
my understanding is that, everybody is down on employees, but right now they've got a significant amount of new recruits at the Wyoming Highway Patrol, meaning that it could very likely just be a temporary problem. So why fix it with this if it's just a temporary problem in terms of manpower?
Ms. Chambers?
Madam Chair, Co-Chairman Nicholas, my understanding is that, quite frankly, Highway Patrol did this out of the goodness of their heart. They received no funding to do this, and it was an additional duty as assigned. I think they've graciously held up this program for a long time. It's not, they've done a great job. I don't want to disparage that, but it's not the best fit. Who we're going with is Sandy Hook Promise, who is an outfit that has facilitated this for other states. Safe to Tell is a really unique program with really unique needs when we're dealing with children of elementary through high school and into college age in crisis. It's a school violence safety tip line. So honestly, while we were very grateful for the work that Highway Patrol has done, this is probably a move for the best. It was born out of necessity, but I think we need stability in the program, and we certainly, and I defer to Colonel Cox if he has any, or not, excuse me, Colonel Cameron if he has any other
Representative
comments.
Larson?
Kara, you say this contract, when will it be implemented?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, it should go into effect January 1. We're waiting on
And
signatures,
how will you fund it?
hopefully through this exception request.
But this won't take place till July.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, we do have some funding that AG Hill mentioned from Homeland Security that will cover it for this 6 months. The Homeland Security grant is not sufficient in perpetuity, which is why we've made this exception request, but we do realize we have to bridge this gap.
And if it's not, and if we don't fund it?
We're gonna have a problem.
Co-Chairman Nicholas?
That was the
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So based on the narrative in your description, Ms. Chambers,
Mhm.
is this Safe to Tell line currently shut down? Because they said they would no longer be able, in the spring of this year, the Highway Patrol said they wouldn't be able to continue for the upcoming 23-24 school year beginning in August, which was just a couple months back. And now the new contract begins in January, hopefully. So does that mean this fall there has been no line available?
Ms. Chambers?
Madam Chair, Representative Walters, no, they wouldn't do that to us. They have limped along all these months while we put this out to bid and moved with this exception request. So no, we are luckily covered, but we do have some concerns. I mean, they're very understaffed at the moment.
Somehow it feels like we're not hearing the rest of the story. It's okay.
Madam Chair, I do think we're trying to be upfront about it. I do think that Highway Patrol has been a wonderful partner for this. We took them at their word when they said they had capacity problems, but to Director Chambers' point too, one of the things that we want to encourage related to this is people reporting school safety issues. And so when she says it's not possibly the best fit, one of the things that, or the concerns that had been brought to our attention was you've got a law enforcement entity working as the call center, which is why it originally went into victim services, was to not discourage people from contacting the call line because they thought they'd be reporting something to law enforcement, which scares people, for lack of a better way to say it. I'm not scared about it, but public is sometimes scared about reporting something, especially children, to a law enforcement entity. And so when we start talking about the fit, the thing that we start to wonder about is, are we deterring people from calling that line because there's a law enforcement element of it? And
So can I interject? Mike,
You're going to.
two thoughts. Number one is, one of the reasons we did it was because they already had 24-hour capabilities and they volunteered to do it.
Correct.
And because they're law enforcement, they tend to be trained in somewhat in diffusing, and so they have value to it. But my understanding was when they answered the phone, they didn't say this is law enforcement. It was basically, how can I help you? And so it's not, so they don't really know it's law enforcement when they call it. And then my final point is, so what's happening is we created it because it was a cost efficiency and they volunteered or said they would do it because they're sitting there anyway. And now this is just another mechanism. Well, let's just have someone else pay for it because we can ask for it.
AG Hill, if you can, I do think this question is more appropriate to the Highway Patrol and how things may have changed over the course of 8 years. I certainly think our decision to put it there was no doubt the right decision at the right time, but things may look differently now. As we know, we're down millions of dollars from the courts as a result of significant vacancies on the Highway Patrol. So AG Hill, if you can answer on behalf of the Highway Patrol.
Madam Chair, I wouldn't want to, if that's acceptable, other than what they told me, which is they do not have the capacity any longer to provide this
And
service.
so is there a mechanism where, well, for example, we're now putting a lot of our effort and money in the suicide hotline type of a thing.
Mhm.
So is there a way to tie that program into this so that, I mean, it's that's going to be a 24-hour service, similar to this. I don't know, and if it's a red light, it's one. If it's blue light, it's the other one. I don't know, just trying to think of efficiencies.
AG
Sure,
Hill.
Madam Chair and Representative Nicholas, I will make one point and then I will defer to Kara because there have been those discussions and she's been a part of those discussions. The one thing I would note is if you look in our table related to this, our request is for 200,000. When you look at the table, it looks as if the governor had added an additional amount in there. It says 440,000 for a total of 640,000. Our request is simply for the 200,000. We believe that the amount put in there for the governor's amount is in error, and it was in part to go to the Department of Health for the suicide line. And so it ties in, I think, for me to mention that here. Our request is simply the 200,000 for the Safe to Tell. That other amount should be directed to the Department of Health. That is not our request.
Dr. Hibbard.
Madam Chair, I would like the opportunity to validate the directions that we received from the governor. We received directions to add $440,000 to Safe to Tell. It very well could be exactly what AG Hill said, that the intent was to have that in the suicide line. But there is a request in the Department of Health. It's their line item number 42, their priority number 42, to expand the suicide network for text and chat. And that request is $774,270, and the governor did approve that. So I would like to have the opportunity to get clarity from the intent of the governor, because there very well could be a conversation where I'm missing something about the expansion of both the systems. Because one of them has already been recommended in the Department of Health. This could be, I'm not saying it is, I'd like to find clarification that it could have been the intent to add the money to the Department of Health. I will get back to you on the intent.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Representative Larson?
Your point is well taken that we're speculating on why the highway patrol done what they do. I think the concerning thing for me though is we've entered into an RFP, entered into negotiations on a contract for funding that we haven't secured. Puts us in a very uncomfortable position.
Madam Chairwoman, if I can respond to that.
Yes.
Sure. And certainly I understand your concern, and certainly it's not something I like to do. But what I do believe is that contract includes an ability to cancel the contract and terminate it in the event we did not get the funding. In the meantime, we believed it was better to use other funding to bridge the gap until June. But we would absolutely make sure there was the ability to cancel that contract, and we do have it. Yes, because Madam Chair and Representative Larson, just let me assure you that I never want to count my chickens before they hatch, and I would never want to box you into something that you didn't believe should be funded. Obviously, I believe it should be funded, and that's why I'm here making that exception request. But I would never do that and box us in that way. And so I respect your process and know that, and that's why we would include those sort of provisions in our contract.
Farad Brow, Representative Stitt?
Madam Chairman, Madam Attorney General, you may have already said this, so I apologize if I just wasn't listening. What's the call volume been for Safe to Tell, roughly?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Stith, I didn't say that, but Kara might know. I don't have that. Another number, Bridget does not keep it fully in her head, but if you know, please answer. And then we were going to go to her too for Representative Nicholas.
Madam Chair, Representative Stiff, our numbers have pretty much stayed steady at about 1,000 calls per year. I can provide a detailed breakout on the types of tips. Sadly, we do see suicide as being one of the #1 tips, which is why we had a conversation with 988. I would like to answer that really quickly. We did have meetings with Department of Health because we are aware that it would appear that there is overlap, but it was really determined by a survey across the nation of 988 and their capabilities and their utility versus what Safe to Tell is, and that would not be an appropriate merger. Quite frankly, there were conversations about how 988 routes calls based on area codes, just some of the nuanced specificity of the types of tips that Safe to Tell gets that aren't necessarily all suicide. That's the other thing is, while suicide remains one of the major tips, we also get tips on vaping and bullying and assault and the like, which 988 would not be appropriate to handle, which is why we have this separate request. And I hope that touched on your question as well as Representative Stith's.
All right, committee, we are 20 minutes over time, but AG Hill, stay. Any final questions for the AG? Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For both your office as well as DCI, I think Law Enforcement Academy would speak for itself in this question. Your remote work policy, what does it look like? How many people are taking advantage? And then also of those that are maybe taking advantage of the remote work, how many live out of state, live and work out of state?
And for clarity, Representative Walters is not asking for any type of remote applications that would be considered accommodations, but rather employees that work actually remotely as part of a legitimate policy.
Madam Chair, Representative Walters, we have no folks working out of state, and we have no folks working on a telework that is not an accommodation. I consider those on a case-by-case basis, primarily because our work is very interactive, especially within our law office. Collaboration is a big deal. That would be true of DCI as well. Law Enforcement Academy, same thing. You need them there at the academy, training folks, cleaning the rooms, providing the food service. So I think the answer would be probably 0 to both of those. Again, I grant those, if people have a circumstance where they need telework, we do that on occasion, or we do accommodate.
Because that might be a required accommodation by law. Okay. All right, no
Well-
final questions for the AG?
I would just mention we had the one more unit, no exception request, but that's the Governor Council on Developmental Disabilities. Our budget request
Didn't
there.
mean to overlook you.
is 1,402,417. Again, they do a tremendous amount of fantastic work advocating for folks with developmental disabilities.
Representative Larson.
So my question on that is we have that Council on for Disabilities. Do we have an idea? Is state government stepping up to the bar, and do we actively help provide opportunities for employment for people with disabilities?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, I believe so. I believe we do some great advocacy work, our primary, and I'll have Shannon, who's more intimately involved with that, speak to it. But one of the main things that the Governor's Council does is advocate for those types of opportunities for folks with developmental disabilities, including both independence and integration. And they're very good about getting into the communities and helping communities understand that and helping train communities. But I would let Shannon fill in any of the details that she might be able to give you.
Shannon, if you would, please.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, Wyoming at one point was #1 in employing people with developmental disabilities. In the past few years, that has declined a little bit, but we're still in the top 10. The biggest issue now is not just employing people, but employing them at higher hours. In other words, instead of working 2 days out of the week for 4 hours a day, can we get full-time employment? So that is the next big step that we're working on right now. And it is one that we take very seriously because employment for people with disabilities gets them out of group homes into their own place, independence, community living, and that drives a lot of what we do.
Well, thank you. Any final questions for the AG? Mr. Richards?
Madam Chairman, just to save Mr. Winders the report, I will email out the forfeiture report. They collected $361,000 in the last calendar year.
Good job.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your report.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Okay, committee, we are 25 minutes behind schedule, so we will take our 3 o'clock break now. We're only going to take a 10-minute break, so we will come back at 3:35. 3:35. All right, it appears that we have a quorum and we are calling the meeting back together at 3:36. We will go ahead and start with our 3:15 agenda item, item number 21, the Guardian Ad Litem, the Office of the Guardian Ad Litem. This is agency number 98. Welcome, Mr. Belcher. Good to see you.
Thank you.
If you could introduce yourself to the committee and go ahead and proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here this afternoon. I know it's been a long day for you all. I'm sure dealing with some big budgets, but I appreciate your time and attention to the GAL budget. And good news is that we're probably not as big as some of the ones that you've heard today. So maybe I can help you get back on track here. Again, my name is Joe Belcher. I'm the director of the Wyoming Office of Guardian Ad Litem. As most know, that we are one of your newest state agencies. We became independent from the Public Defender's Office in July of 2020. I do want to thank Director Hibbard and Mr. Ogle for preparation of this budget. And I also want to thank behind me Director Lozano and Ashley Kurzwicki from her office in assisting our agency over the last 9 months in our fiscal responsibilities, as we've been without a fiscal person since March of 2023. And so without their help, it's been a more difficult road over the last few months, but we do appreciate their assistance in that. The structure of the Wyoming Office of Guardian Ad Litem is certainly director. We have a permanency attorney, which handles our termination of parental rights cases and appeals that rise out of our juvenile cases. That person also carries some underlying Guardian Ad Litem work. We have 2 paralegals, one here in Cheyenne and one in our Gillette field office. And we have 19 contract Guardian Ad Litems throughout the state of Wyoming. And we have 5 state Guardian Ad Litem employees. And so that's how we're structured. And the budget reflects that. One thing that we have added since the last time we've met with the benefit of our 4E money is we've contracted with a person to do help us with social work interaction with our cases and our Guardian Ad Litems so that we can maintain the high quality legal representation that the U.S. Children's Bureau, ABA, NACC require so that that person helps with our independent investigation and any sort of work that needs to be done on a case that we just don't have the expertise on as an attorney. And so we also have contracted with using 4E money, what's called a peer advocate or a person with lived experience to also assist our clients that are involved in abuse and neglect cases, CHINS cases, delinquencies, termination of parental rights cases that might need further assistance in helping our clients out. Some of the upcoming projects that we're going to be working on, we'll be updating our website, which is desperately needed. I'm hoping to add another person to that social work unit, again, using 4E money, and work on over the next year or the next budget session to reclassify some of our state Guardian Ad Litems that are woefully underclassed for the experience that they have. So if there's any questions on that, I can go to the budget.
Any questions, committee? All right, seeing none, go ahead.
So again, we're small budget. And so we have just two exceptions requests to the budget. And one is to our 100 series. And that's on page, let's see here. It shows up, I believe, page 6. Page, excuse me. Page 2, correct. And yes, it's to the 100 series, and really it's to kind of fill the hole that's been there since we became an independent state agency for salary increases that were created when the director position was created, and some different people were moved around and hired when we became an independent agency. And so that amount is for total of $120,750 for that.
Madam Chair?
Senator
Move
Gore?
your mic just a little closer. There you
I
go.
did
So we
put it
can,
here.
so we can hear it.
Sure. The other exception request
Madam
comes.
Chairman, I have a question on that.
Representative
First.
Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So the question here, and you're not the only agency that has done this, but it appears that this amount is above the amount of available funding for your 100 series that was appropriated within this existing budget. And so it creates a real dilemma for the legislature if every agency goes out and approves staff and salary increases above what is sustainable within the existing budget. And so I guess the question then becomes, how would you like the legislature to address this? Because otherwise, agencies start driving the budget beyond what is expected. And I recognize that your explanation is it's a hole that was created because of becoming your own agency, but that still doesn't give you the authority to allow pay increases above and beyond what is allocated and appropriated through the legislature, especially through the Section 319 and 329 compensate salary changes in the existing budget that we're operating under today.
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Walters, and I think what this is it's not really a salary increase per se. It's just getting our 100 series to where it should be. I mean, there's not going to be any increase to anyone's salary. It's just getting that, running that deficit up to zero in that 100 series. We're just continuing to run a deficit in that because of that continual lack of funding in that 100 series to make those positions that were created in 2020. And Mr. Ogle or Director Hibbert can fill you in on that more if you would like.
Director Hibbert?
Madam
Friend?
Chair, I'm going to read Section 310, it's the limitation on salary increases, and explain to you the process that we have in place, and also that we've already discussed how we would handle this in the past. I've spoken to this before. The Section 310, except as provided in subsection D, which is the flexibility of vacancy savings of this section, the 25-26 biennial general fund standard budget for personnel services 100 series for each agency shall be less than or equal to the 23-24 biennial appropriations for personnel services 100 series for each agency in all enacted laws, including any calculated amount to continue legislative approved compensation increases throughout the 25-26 biennium. So throughout the budgets, you've seen Chapter 17 for the compensation increase. In this case, the compensation for those positions in the budget eclipses the amount of money that they had in 23-24. There was adjustments that were made. And when that happened, we have put exception requests in place. We advise you that if that occurred, we would do that. And then this exception request, and there are handfuls of others, are in tune to what the expectation is established for us to monitor and manage this. Does that mean it's your fault or our fault? It can be my fault, Mr. Chairman. It's what it is, and we are following what the expectations that were established.
Madam Chair,
Senator Kinsky?
for Mr. Hibbard then, so this would be added to the standard budget? It's not a one-time?
Mr. Chairman, this is an ongoing request, and yes, it would be added to the standard budget to meet the compensation requirements as they exist today for their personnel.
Madam,
Co-Chairman Nicholas?
So just to say it another way, you implemented the pay increases, even though on some different agencies, you had to go over and above what their standard budget was.
Mr. Chairman, I don't make decisions on compensation or implement it. What I do is I follow the budget, and we are here today to say that this case is that we have a budget that's too small to what the compensation requirements are of the personnel in that agency.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Stitt?
So, Director, since this is $120,000 that would go into the Series 100, if you don't get that money, then the employees will get paid less money. And if you do get this money, they'll get paid more, right? I mean, there is a compensation increase at issue here, or no?
Madam Chair.
Director?
Representative Stiff, no, no one is going to get any more. We're just kind of backfilling when we moved over, became our own agency, the compensation for, obviously didn't have a director position that was created. So that's a certain level. And then that's the majority of this money for the director position. And then we had to fill another position from that was empty. That position came with a little bit higher, not large, but higher salary because that person took a lower. Basically, when we hired that person, we had to pay a certain amount of money to get that person in, and so if we don't do this, as we're just going to continue to be in the negative in the 100 series. So it's not like we're going to hand out Christmas gifts of higher compensation next week. So,
Madam Chair.
Senator Kinsky?
So what confused me and caused me to initially believe it had to do with the salary increases in your narrative on page 4 under agency challenges. It's like fifth sentence in the bottom. However, in comparison to other state attorneys, the Office of GAO staff attorneys continue to be undercompensated and underclassified. So that led me to believe this was for an increase. I get it now, it's not. But tell me how your attorneys are underpaid relative to other state attorneys.
Madam Chair.
Director.
Senator Kinsky. That's what I referenced in my opening statement, is that we have a number of attorneys that have been with the program for over 10 years, 13 years since that have been working for us, and that have been an attorney themselves outside of the Office of Guardian Ad Litem for well over 20 years. They're classified still as an A2, an attorney 2 position, which really, if you look at their experience in the GAL program and their experience as an attorney overall, would probably technically would be an A4, attorney 4, which would be a significant jump in compensation. And so I'm trying to do my best to keep people engaged in our program. We're lucky that we haven't had anyone really leave, but I feel it's only fair that they eventually make what they are as an attorney with all their experience over the years.
So follow on.
Yes.
So I'm going to tell you what I understood you to say, and correct me. I think you said, though they may have 20 plus years of experience, they're classified based on just how long they've worked for the agency.
Director.
Madam Chair, Senator Kinsky, that is correct.
So is there some sort of appeals process that you go to A&I to try and reclassify them?
Madam Chair.
Director.
Senator Kinsky, there is, and it all comes back to what's in your 100 series. Can you afford it? So if I could afford it, I could certainly do that. I just don't have the money in my 100 series.
Madam Co-Chair.
Co-chairman?
So part of it is, that's what they were hired at. And that's the job they took. But what's interesting is that the public defender is no longer the bottom of the totem pole on what you pay attorneys. So he's moved up. Right.
And Director, when you're talking about these attorneys, are you referring to the 6 full-time attorneys within the office?
Madam Chair, can you repeat that?
When you're talking about these attorneys that have worked for such an extensive period of time, are those the 6 full-time attorneys within the office?
Madam Chair, that is correct. So, yes, I can with, when we're talking contract attorneys, that's a little easier to bump them up and with my money, my 900 series and through my 4E. But yes, it's those state employee attorneys that's been with us for a long time.
Representative Larson?
So Director Belcher, there's probably one thing we really want you to understand, and that's that we love you. We really do. Your first time in front of this committee. There's some nuances with this. Thank you for all you do. It's not an easy thing to come here, but we're just so grateful that you are here and for the work that you guys do. It's really, really important. And so everybody around here that's looking at you has a heart for what you do. This is just our job, and we work through it, and we'll get all of this settled out, and it's going to be great. But my question to you is, you mentioned some 4E reimbursement. But I'm not seeing on there where that's reflected. Is that reflected back through that local component that's in there? The local match funds, where's that reflected as revenue?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, that match that you're looking at that's what we get from each county that has the Guardian Ad Litem office agency working in that. The 4E money comes through our child welfare agency, obviously Department of Family Services. And so that comes quarterly through them, through the federal government.
Right.
On that. So
would that not reflect someplace in that spreadsheet as some federal funds or something? I'm just trying to understand the structure of this. Normally we look through and we can see that you've got general fund revenue and you've got other funds, matching funds, and if these are federal funds. And so maybe Kevin, maybe you can help me.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Hibbert?
I believe this is an opportunity to show that as a 301, because really what it is it's DFS, they have control of the CEPA or the reporting and the distribution. So ultimately they have to do the reporting. However, there's a function where we have a change of money from one place to the other, and it's like this. The federal government gives us $1, but we report it being spent in 2 budgets. We don't want to do that. So what we do is we use a Fund 301. So what we could do in this case is we could modify this budget to reflect the anticipated 301 transactions for the 4E. And then that was
Okay, thank you.
help you.
Appreciate it. Hang in there, Director.
Any additional questions? All right, seeing none, any final comments, Director?
Madam Chair, I guess that the one final exception request was just from ETS increase in there for just $6,000. So our total budget request is for just a little over 5.5 and then 126,000 in that budget request to make up that number. Having said that, any further questions?
Going in front of a courtroom is actually easier than the Joint Appropriations Committee. Representative Larson?
So at one time, I think I had asked you a question if you had or was working with the tribes to help with the GL system on the reservation, and just curious if those conversations have moved forward, and if you have a sense on what, and I know that those are sovereigns outside our position, but if you have an opinion on how well that's going for them.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, the tribes have their own guardian ad litem. And so we have reached out to that person. It changes quite often. I think one time that person was actually out of Salt Lake City. So I guess to answer your question, haven't gone anywhere on those, but we're never willing not to assist the tribes as much as we can.
All right. Thank you. No, we passed the Indian Child Welfare Act at the state level. Any comments about that?
Madam Chair, I think that's a good thing. I don't think we're going to see any changes how it's utilized or used, but I'm glad it's codified in our state statute. So now we can say WICWA and ICWA.
All right. Well, final questions for the director. All right, seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Our last big agency of the day, the Public Defender's Office. We have Director Diane Lozano. All right, everybody ready? It's our last agency of the day. Welcome, Director Lozano. If you could introduce yourself and who you have with you, and we're happy to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair Nethercott, Co-Chair Nicholas, Senators and Representatives. Again, my name's Diane Lozano. I'm the Director of the Office of the State Public Defender, also known as the State Public Defender. I have with me my Fiscal Officer, Ashley Krizwicki. I may need to lean over her and ask her for some clarifications from time to time. Numbers don't stick in my head or come out of my mouth as well as you think they would. For those of you who don't know me, I've been with the Public Defender's Office since I graduated from law school in 1994, and I have functioned at every level in the Public Defender's Office. And finally, as the director since 2007. So I've done this many times, but that doesn't mean I still don't get nervous. As a trial attorney, I hate jury selection. I never am ready for it because I don't know what's going to be asked. So hopefully today will go smoothly. The Public Defender's Office has been in existence as a state agency since 1978. Our role is to provide constitutionally effective, ethically competent counsel to individuals charged in state court with state crimes for which they could possibly go to jail. As such, our agency is a bit of a reactionary agency when a court appoints us to represent somebody, if we're available, and there's case law that sort of defines that now, we're obligated to represent those individuals. We have 12 trial offices around the state. Many of my trial offices handle more than one county. Our Converse County office handles 4 counties in the 8th Judicial District. So each of my field offices looks a little bit differently. But among those field offices, we have 53 employee attorneys, not all of whom are full-time. Some of them are half-time, some of them are 3/4 time, some of them are 98%. We have 5 employee investigators, and I have 27 legal assistants. In addition to that, we have 21 contract attorneys that are sprinkled throughout the state. Our contract attorneys originally were put within the Public Defender's Office to handle conflict cases. But as caseloads have increased, our contract attorneys actually handle a standard daily workload in most of our offices, but we still utilize them to handle our conflict cases. We also have 5 contract investigators around the state. I will tell you that today we have 6,021, open cases. I will tell you that I would have to do some work to be able to tell you, though, how many of those cases are pending closure in our system, how many of those cases are pending sentencing, or how many of those cases are pending trial. I brought my prop, I'd have to use my calculator to go through my database to tell you how many of those are felonies, how many of those are misdemeanors, how many of those are juveniles. I could not break down for you today without some work how many of those are violent felonies, how many of those are domestic violences, how many of those are even DUIs. I could, with my calculator, looking at reports that I can run, help with that, or I could pay ETS to run those reports for me. I give you that as context a little bit for my exception 1 request that we'll get to here in a minute. Over the years, many of you have been familiar with the struggles that the Public Defender's Office has had in terms of manageable caseloads. The Constitution requires that my attorneys have the requisite amount of time to handle each case that they have in an ethically competent manner. They have to have the resources to represent individuals. We have a lot of mentally ill clients who, by law, have to be evaluated by forensic psychologists. The law allows us to get second opinions from time to time, so we need expert money for those things. If I have a client who's charged with being in a car accident in which someone died and they're facing 20 years in prison in an aggravated vehicular homicide, the law requires me to hire an accident reconstruction expert. And those are just a couple of examples of the things the Constitution requires me to provide to my attorneys. I have to have office space for them, although the Public Defender Act requires the counties to pay for that or to give us a stipend. Each county does that a little bit differently. Sometimes we're paying a lease, sometimes we're not. We have to provide computers, resources, so our attorneys can respond to prosecutors, can get court notices that we almost always get by email these days. And we have to draft our motions to fulfill our legal obligations for our clients. I would tell you that today, maybe the first time I've been before this committee that I don't feel like we have a couple forest fires to put out. Caseloads have dropped since the pandemic. And I couldn't tell you exactly why that is. I am certain that the pandemic played a role in that. I'm also certain that the legislature did a couple of things that helped us with that because of the pandemic, and then also because of our crisis in the 6th Judicial District in 2019. We no longer represent most people charged with traffic offense because they can't go to jail. Can't go to jail, they don't get the right to counsel. So I think that significantly impacted our workloads. And then Joint Judiciary also modified the indigency standards, and those are the standards that the court uses to determine who qualifies for our services. It's been kind of a bumpy road for a while. I think now we have everybody on board. I think the Supreme Court, I've reached out to them. They've come up with a standard form, and they've had trainings, if you will, with clerks and judges so that we can ensure that we're only representing the people that actually qualify for our services, and I think that's important. Having said that, I still think our office represents 9 out of 10 people who are in circuit court facing criminal cases. As it goes, poor people tend to be the ones that are being arrested and charged with crimes. I can tell you that since the pandemic, anecdotally speaking, it feels like crime has gotten more violent. Lots of shootings, lots of strangulations. I heard some questions to the Attorney General Hill about that. I couldn't give you specifics, but it does feel like even if cases are going down, some of the seriousness of those cases is going up. We currently are not paying on any capital cases, but we'll talk about that with my third exception as to why we still believe we need capital case monies. I know you've heard this from many agencies, maybe specifically from the agencies who employ attorneys, but we are struggling to recruit and retain attorneys. In my busier offices, I almost always have a vacancy of an attorney, and that seems small compared to, Department of Transportation or Department of Corrections. But when I'm down an attorney in an office, that means my other attorneys are carrying a caseload that maybe the Constitution says that they should not carry. We are very grateful and appreciative for the work that this committee and the legislature as a whole did to compensate our attorneys and our staff. And I think over time that will help. One question that I think was asked of Director Belcher, though, goes to my bigger concern is the attorney classification scheme. Some of you have heard me talk to you about that, and maybe I can shed some light onto what that concern is. And of course, now we have Section 310 that we have to abide by, but the attorney classification scheme essentially has 5 levels of attorneys, and each of those levels is determined primarily by how long a person has practiced law. So a level 1 attorney is 0 to 2 years as a lawyer. Level 2 is 2 to 5. Level 3 is 5+. Level 4 is 7+. And then attorney 5 is 10+. And then we have some supervisor levels too that match 4 and 5 in terms of pay. But those classifications are also defined by the work that an attorney has to do. So in theory, a brand new lawyer should only handle misdemeanors, only handle low-level cases where there's little impact on the defendant. So in case we're making mistakes, there's not a big harm. A level 2 attorney is presumed to be able to handle a misdemeanor caseload without supervision and can handle most low-level felonies, thefts, maybe some drug cases, maybe an aggravated assault where there isn't injury. And our level 3 attorneys, though, are presumed to be able to handle all misdemeanors and most felonies without supervision or guidance, that they are the journeyman level people in our agency that we can give them mostly our daily caseloads and case assignments, and we can handle those cases. And then a level 4 attorney is somebody who handles the more serious cases, maybe needs more supervision the more serious it gets. And then we only have 1 level 5 attorney, and that's our chief trial counsel, who would handle the more high-profile cases, a lot of homicides, capital cases, and those types of cases. But as it turns out, because of the sort of lack of population that we have and the different communities that we have, I have level 2 attorneys who by nature have to do level 4 work. And I'm not here to tell you that whether we're qualified or not to do that. I think my attorneys do the best job that they can, and I think we have the best law firm in the state of Wyoming. But I'm not paying them level 4 money because they can't be classified to that until they practice law for 7 years. And so my constant struggle when keeping attorneys is my lack of ability to pay for them for the actual work that they do. I have a lot of level 4 attorneys who are getting paid for the work that they do, and I'm not worried about them. And they're not the people who quit unless it's time for them to retire, and we can handle that. It's the lower level attorneys who are doing heavier work, getting paid less, who leave us and we can't retain them. My goal would be to keep somebody 3 to 5 years. I think if we do that, we're doing a good job. But it's that area of experience that we're lacking in terms of being able to recruit and retain them.
Director Lozano, do you think that's different in any other law practice, private or public?
Madam Chairman, that's a good question. No, I think that's probably pretty consistent across the board. I think everybody's struggling with that. But I certainly, I'm asking young attorneys with different skill levels by nature of where they live, by nature of their cases, to handle serious cases. And I'm telling them, well, you're going to get paid $66,000 a year when the person who's been practicing for 10 years might not have the same caseload as you, and they're going to get paid $120. And I think it impacts morale. And I think the answer to that is I'm not here to ask you for more money and I'm not asking you to fix it now, but we need to do an occupational study on attorneys. I think the one that we drafted years ago, probably 2008 or 9, doesn't necessarily fit where the public defender's office is. And maybe it fits the attorney general's office now, I don't know, but I think the district attorney's office is also struggle with that. So I would say that to me, that's the biggest factor in recruitment and retention. And it could just be that people don't want to go into public service. I don't let my people work from home. I don't think we can do our work remotely. I think we have to be in our offices. We have to meet with our clients in person, and I want my attorneys physically in court when possible. So maybe there's some of that. And then just to sort of close out my what I thought was going to be a brief introduction is that one of the struggles we're having with our cases, and you're going to hear about this from Department of Health, I'm sure you've heard about it from other agencies, is that we got a lot of clients who are severely mentally ill who are sitting in our jails. And they're sitting in our jails waiting to go to the state hospital. And the state hospital doesn't have the room or the capacity to get them to the jail. And so that's been an added pressure for my lawyers, an added pressure for the jails. I mean, you're going to hear probably from everybody across the board that that's an issue. And I would just say this, I've heard this stated a couple of times and I have the opportunity to clear it up. We're not waiting on competency evaluations to get done. All competency evaluations have always been able to be done on an outpatient basis, so they can be done at the jail. So the delay that we have isn't to get those initial evaluations, whether it's misdemeanors or felonies. It's usually in restoration. So due process requires that a defendant be able to rationally understand and rationally assist in his case. And that's thresholds. You can't charge him, you can't punish him, you can't take a plea, you can't do anything unless they're able to do that. And so my lawyers, who are not psychologists and not social workers, have to make that determination from a client. And sometimes that's easier said than done. But once we have a concern that our client has something going on that prevents him from assisting in his own defense, being available in court mentally, so to speak, we have to notify the court and evaluation triggers. Usually that's the state hospital. Usually that's done at our jails. If our client's out of custody, we can do that by video. Occasionally though, I have a client who can't even communicate with me at all and is doing really weird things in his jail cell. It's gonna have to go to the state hospital because he's not stable enough to get out. But that process is pretty smooth. That's not causing delay, at least not in my cases, not from what my attorneys are telling me. If the state hospital says that the person is not competent though, the law requires that this person be brought to competence or restored. And we call that the restoration process. The law requires that that happen at the state hospital, at least by my reading of the statute and most judges. So it's waiting to get to the state hospital to be restored that is the delay. I currently have had since July 3 clients pending restoration, waiting to go to the state hospital for 7-8 months. One of them was a misdemeanor case. And I hate to do that to somebody who might do more time waiting to go to the state hospital than he would had he received the maximum sentence, but couldn't have a conversation with him. He was completely psychotic. And so I had no choice but to do that. So I would just offer that to this committee when you hear that the delay is in restoration, but it's real. And it's not just the state hospital. I talked to law enforcement and they'll take one of my clients who's throwing rocks at cars passing down the street to the local hospital, and the hospital won't take him. So they don't know what to do with him. So they put him in jail. They get charged with the property destruction offense. One person under those circumstances, an aggravated assault, a violent felony. So I would tell you that in terms of cases, those are important, and I think they affect everybody in the system. And the budget, absolutely. And I don't know, right? I don't know what the answer is, but it's tough. Wherever we fall on the side of the system, it's tough to see people who are mentally ill sitting in a jail cell waiting to go to the state hospital.
Director, do you think that there are more mentally ill defendants coming into your services than before?
Madam Chairwoman, it feels like it. Anecdotally, it does feel like it. And I don't know if the pandemic pushed some people off the cliff, if there's lack of services for some people. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but it feels like it. And not just mentally ill, but really really suffering, very ill people are the ones I've had a lot of contact with.
Thank you.
Okay, so then on to my budget. And if there's no questions about that, sorry I got long-winded. I had my soapbox, so I got on it. So I think our budget shows that we have 2 divisions, and really it's just the public defender's office. At one point in time, we did have court-appointed capital cases, but we no longer have that, and so that's really not officially a unit. Before you on page 3 is the standard budget and the governor's recommendations as to that. In addition to what we believe we need to run our office on a daily basis, we did have 3 exceptions requests. And to go back to the context with all those numbers that I gave you and about my database, exception request number 1 is for a new case management system. We were funded for a new case management system for budget year 21-22, but when we had to cut money in the phase 2 COVID cuts, we cut that money. We felt.
Representative?
So that was one of my questions. And so was that a step 2 or step 3 cut that you took to reduce that? And then, so are you saying you do not have any type of case management system now? I just want to clarify that.
Madam Chairman, or Chairwoman, sorry, and Representative Larson, we have a homegrown database system that I think has fallen apart, but we don't have what I would refer to as a case management system nor any funding for it. And if I could describe to you our database system, when we had ETS people who worked for us and not for ETS, our IT staff, they built a database with Access and SQL, which is really just a data collecting. I think it might be obsolete in 2003. Their hope was that it would last for 3 to 4 years, and here we are 20 years later. And my database is really just a database. My legal assistants get new cases and they enter certain fields from those cases into the database. And so I can tell you how many new cases we received in a given period of time. I can look at the data by attorney. I can look at it by field office. I can look at it by case weight, but I can't break it down much beyond that. So in terms of functionality, it's really not, are we in the 21st century? Not 21st century, functional in my mind. It also isn't a system where my attorneys can get into their cases and see their work product or see what's going on or see where their cases are. It can't be connected to our calendar system or our other electronic filing systems. But the bigger concern is that, and ETS would back me up on this. I mean, there's a fear every day that we're going to come to work and our data is gone. Anytime that we do an update, we had to do an update Tuesday night and reboot our computers on Wednesday, we're afraid that my staff might not have the database anymore. And it's twofold. My staff that enters the data, it's a portal on their computer. It's not web-based. So if something goes wrong with that computer or something happens with a security breach into that system, if you will, we can't access it. And then my attorneys and I access it on web-based. So that's a little bit more secure. But I can tell you that every time we have to put in a heat ticket about our database, there's a little bit of panic from ETS that it's going to be a bigger problem than they know how to fix. Plus, they didn't program it, and so sometimes we don't know what we're doing, and our fixes are just to see what we're doing.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Senator?
So you're one of my assigned agencies, so I want to make sure that I'm understanding.
Okay, good.
So when I listen to your opening statement and I read the narrative on case management system, it tells me this is just tracking who's got how many cases of what type and the complexity. I want to make sure of that, because when you say case management to somebody in private practice, it tracks the clients, it tracks the deadlines, it helps track billing, it maybe even generates documents. Does this do anything other than track the caseload for each attorney, the complexity, the type of offense?
Madam Chair and Senator Kinski, currently what I have, it only tracks. What we want is to build a system that does all of those things.
Okay. And follow up. Does it do anything else besides that? Does it do document generation? Does it do calendaring? Does it do any of those things?
Madam Chair and Senator Kinski, we hope to have it at least be able to merge documents and become a true case management system. I don't know about the calendaring, but when we worked with ETS about this request, they went out and they talked to different states and different similar, public defenders' offices and looked at what they did. We looked at, tracking the cases, being able to tell you what kinds of cases, maybe some time management things, which we don't do. I don't track how much time we do on our cases. But our hope is to also include the documents, generating documents, hopefully have ticklers on the calendar. All the things that a case management system in a private practice does is what we would like to have.
Follow up. You anticipated my next question. What ETS was an RFP design? Did you put it out to proposal to various firms, or is this going to be a homegrown product?
Madam Chair and Senator Kinski, we haven't put it out. What ETS has told us is that they don't have the capacity to do it, so we would have to put it out to bid, but we're waiting to see if we get the funding before we do that. I think we talked to 4 different companies to generate what we thought it would cost. And I do have a breakdown by what ETS said it's going to cost and how, and I can provide that to the community as well.
Follow on, if I may.
Sure.
And you said they talked to other states. What other states, other public defender offices do? Is that in the breakdown that you've got there, their analysis? And if not, just send it to me so that I can see that the due diligence has been done.
Madam Chair and Senator Kinski, it's not in that breakdown, but I can get that to you. We had
Thank you.
2 or 3, 4 meetings with them, and I can get you that information. I feel like every time I'm in front of this committee, or I'm talking to the governor, or I'm talking to Director Hibbard, I'm not quite sure how many cases we have other than newly assigned during the time frame. And I'd like to be able to give you that better information, and I think you're better informed about where the Public Defender's Office stands from day to day. The ABA has adopted new national standards that are far more complex than what I collect now or what I report. So I don't know if I'm meeting national standards or not. So certainly, you know, being able to have a program where we could actually add some fields, so I could look at, you know, the national standards break down the type of felony you have, not just how many felonies. And I think it's important for us to do that. I've been here a long time. That's been one of my goals, was to get the agency to a place where our data was accurate and meaningful, and that it mattered in terms of what our funding is. And so I'd like to see that completed this
Madam
budget year
Chair.
if we can.
Follow up?
So I get the need, so I don't need any more on that, but it may be something that outlines, not today, just a memo that outlines the process. If we get the authorization, then here are our next steps.
Madam Chair and Senator Kinsey will get that too.
Thank you.
Director, my opinion is that this amount, which is a lot of money, but it seems low. When you talked to those 4 vendors, just to kind of get a ballpark price point, did you do middle of the road or the high end? I'm worried that's not enough money.
Madam Chair, if I remember correctly, this was to get us to a place where we can put it on a platform and see how it works. So it may be phase 1, if I remember correctly. And I think they anticipated at least 2 phases, maybe 3.
And I just want to make a point based on my opinion. Yeah, so you indicated that the current system you have, which is not acceptable to move forward, but it was designed by the office itself using like Access back in 2003. And you've continued to use that for 20 years now, and at no cost to you or the state, correct?
Correct.
And so that's what happens when you build it in-house. It might last for 20 years at no cost. Side note, not about you.
Madam Chair,
Senator Kinsky?
and again, I get the need, but now you said phase 2, so we're gonna need to understand that too. Whether that we're anticipating a $5 million price tag or a $10 million price tag, we'll
Madam
need to
Chair.
understand that.
And I'll get you what at least I understand it to be as of right now. I believe that what we were told and in our working meetings, that they believe that each amount would decrease because, you know, right now there's more man hours doing the programming. So I do think it will go down, and I hope it doesn't get near $5 million, but I'll tell you what I know so far.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Stitt?
Director Lozano, had a couple questions about paying for the case management system. As the narrative says, counties pay 15% of the agency's operating budget, and they pay it like clockwork, because if they don't, the state treasurer will take it out of their sales tax. So, and in the account from local revenue, we've actually got $1.4 million in that account. And so my question is, would you object to paying for this whole system, which is less than $1 million, out of that excess money we seem to have in the local account?
Madam Chair and Representative Stith, I think it would be helpful before I answer that to get everybody to page 16 of mine, which is the special revenue fund history. And I will be honest with you, Representative Stith, I'm not sure I understand what all those numbers are. And so Director Hibbert might have to bail me out on this, as he's very good at doing when needed. But I don't know that there's extra money. I would tell you, Representative Stith, that my understanding is that what we've projected to bill in 23-24 is just a projection, because we're not through that yet. And I think there might be 2 quarters that we haven't billed yet. So I don't know what that amount is. And I wouldn't, however it gets paid, I don't object to that at all. But I don't know the specifics or whether or not it can be done that way. I think our budget is set up that 85% of it has to come from general fund and 15% special revenue, but Director Hibbert might have to answer that for me.
Director Hibbert?
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, Madam Chairman, I would like the opportunity to review this table and get the data clear, and I will do that and get back to you on that. It's not clear to me. I'm trying to understand it, but I will get back to you on it.
All right, thank you. Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. That's kind of related to my question is, I'm curious to know if the design of what you want has been completed. I mean, so that, you know, in 2 years, you progress, not come back and come back and come back, right? I mean,
Right.
the need's clear, but is the design complete on what you need?
Madam Chair and Representative Henderson, the design is not complete. I believe what we have given to you in the request and then the table that I can share with you that I will also share with Senator Kinski is to completion, but then how will it function on a platform? There's other phases in terms of that. The companies that we met with have completed systems that are being used by other public defender offices and other crime-related agencies, if you will, just where Montana hired, what was the name? I have to tell you, I like Montana's the best because it's the simplest and I think it'll cost us the least amount of money. But what we're looking at are completed ones that will work. It's just a matter of getting it programmed and in. So it's not complete. My hope is that we can get as much done with this exception request. And then maybe at supplemental, if we need phase 2, that we'll look at doing that. And maybe we'll have monies elsewhere to help pay for that. So I can't really totally answer your question, but my hope is to get much done with this amount of money as we can.
Yeah, I do think it's prudent to share with the whole committee your ballpark of the whole project. And we'll recognize that it is a total estimate. But I do think it's important for us to understand what the phases may be.
And Madam Chair, I agree.
And that way it doesn't feel like we're getting trapped into a system with just funding phase 1 and then all of a sudden we're going to do a $5 million
I agree.
phase 2 that we're committed to do.
I agree, Madam Chair, and I would hate to do that to the state of Wyoming as well. And I'd like my agency to have a case management system that works sooner rather than later.
Madam Chair,
Senator?
I don't know what your timing and your urgency is, but if we made this appropriation but footnoted it to say, don't make any commitments until you come back during the supplemental so that we get the complete plan, do you anticipate being able to deploy before then? Is your sense of urgency and the timing such that you might want to, you said phase 1, are you ready for phase 1 before the next supplemental or likely not?
Director?
Madam Chair, I don't know that I know that yet. I hope that we're through phase 1. We'll at least know what the costs are for phase 1 by then. And my fiscal officer wisely just pointed out to me on the sheet that I will give to you, ETS did project out through budget year 27-28, and they think it would just be an additional $64,080 to finish it up.
What
So
was
we
that
do
number?
have $64,080. So not a lot. I think those are just costs to make sure it's working and any tweaks,
Follow.
if you will.
Yes.
And this material, if you'd give it to staff, they'll distribute
do
it
it.
to everybody on the committee.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Representative Sherwood?
Thank you, Madam and Director. So on page 18, it talks about this is, or the governor's recommending that this is an ongoing exception request. And I think just in the big picture of our conversation today, understanding, what are the needs for phase 1, phase 2, and then ongoing. And maybe that would help us to better understand what is a one-time cost, which is actually ongoing for software
Okay.
maintenance.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we'll get that information to you.
All right. You want to go on to priority number 2?
Priority number 2 is sort of every year coming in and asking for our, what we think we need technology-wise, and we get this information from ETS and our numbers from ETS. But we need computers for 82 of our 92 employees. We bought with this budget year, we got the Cheyenne Trial Office new computers. We are at warranty, and so we need those to be done. We learned sort of the hard way that the computers we bought last time weren't great, and so ETS helped us find something better. So we need those 82 computer setups for attorneys and legal assistants and investigators. And then our Microsoft Office license is out, and so is our Adobe license. And of course, we need Microsoft Office to do our legal documents and PowerPoints, all the things that we as lawyers need and our staff needs to do that. I think it's the basic platform for us to do video with court is Microsoft Teams, so we need to get that license back in place. And most of our discovery has to have some form of Adobe to read that discovery and print it and show it to our clients. So that would be our request as to priority number 2. The total amount is $178,356, and the governor did recommend funding for that.
Madam Chair.
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarification, 82 computers, and how many licenses are you anticipating with this purchase?
Madam Chair and Representative Walters. You need 89 licenses for each, Microsoft and Adobe.
Priority number 3?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Capital case funding. Not my favorite thing to ask for. I've worked on capital cases as a public defender in some form since 1996. The Constitution requires that capital case representation be something that's bigger and deeper than regular capital criminal defense work under the Sixth Amendment. Although we don't currently have capital cases that we are paying on, I can tell you that we did pay on 2 different cases in the last fiscal year. And of the money that we were allocated, we spent $255,288.86. What the Constitution requires my office to do is in a first-degree murder case, once that's been charged, a prosecutor decides whether or not to seek death. And sometimes that's done officially with a notice to the court. But what the United States Supreme Court tells me I have to do is when a prosecutor even mentions the possibility of the death penalty, I have to start investigating it as if it's a death penalty case. And what that requires is mitigation investigation. Most death penalty cases that are reversed after a sentence of death has been handed down is because of ineffective assistance of counsel, because that mitigation investigation has not been done. I can tell you that in our most recent case in Casper, District Attorney Itzen told my attorneys and told me we have a very good communication with prosecutors about capital cases, that this to him looked like a potential capital case. And he gave us the opportunity, though, to do some mitigation investigation to share with him what we knew about our client and his life story and his genetic history and his family history going back 3 generations. So we had to hire some mitigation specialists. We don't have any employed in the state of Wyoming. I don't know that we have anybody in the state of Wyoming qualified to do it. We used a firm out of California to do that. And they did some work and they did investigation, met with our client, did some screening and testing of our client, and we submitted that letter to District Attorney Itzen for about $202,000, and he decided not to seek death, but our client had to take responsibility and accept that he would die in prison with a life without parole sentence, and we were able to get that accomplished. And at $202,000 at great discount to the capital cases that I've been involved in, supervised or on the ground level, those cases cost anywhere from, $1 million to $2.5 million. My costs, state costs, county costs. So it's a bargain, and it's what the Constitution requires us to do. So having that $500,000 come to us every budget year, even though it looks like a one-time request, we are able to carry that over from budget year to budget year. It enables us to get on the ground as soon as the Constitution requires us to do that work. And also the Constitution and the ABA requires that any attorney who handle a capital case has to have training every 2 years. So I have to be able to train my attorneys. I'll be honest with you, we didn't train them during the pandemic. We didn't have any capital cases, but we started that up, and that's about a $50,000 to $80,000 a year bill. So in order, as long as the state of Wyoming has the death penalty as an option in first-degree murder cases, the Public Defender's Office has to have the money to meet its constitutional requirements. So I would ask for funding in that amount, and the governor agrees.
Excellent work on and leadership on both the Public Defender's Office and District Attorney Itzen on
Madam Chair,
a resolution there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Senator Kinski?
you mentioned level 2 attorneys working on cases that might be a little bit of a stretch. Reminds me of the story of the new associate went to the senior partner, expressed some uncertainty about the work he was being given, and the senior partner said, when I was younger, I lost some cases I should have won, and now I win some cases I should lose. So in the end, a rough sort of justice is done.
I know the feeling about that. I tell my clients that all the time. Rolling the dice at trial isn't always what you need to do.
Madam Chairman?
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think we're about to wrap up. I'd just take the committee back to page 15 in the governor's recommendation, and this is language that we included in the budget we're operating under today that allows this agency to flex money between 900 and 100 series based on the needs of hiring full-time attorneys or hiring contract attorneys. And this is something we would address during our budget markup, but it is noted in the governor's recommendation there, and just wanted to point that out to the committee.
Thank you, Representative.
And Madam Chair, if I could just make a comment about that. That is certainly a provision that helped us in 2019 when we were in crisis in the 6th Judicial and the 7th Judicial District, and the whole contempt case was going on, and it has proved invaluable. But I would tell you that we'll be responsible with that, and we haven't, I don't think, abused that flexibility. So we would like to keep it.
Co-Chairman?
Thank you. So is there a fund, a death penalty fund that you have a certain, you keep a certain balance? And for some reason, I thought that you had that.
Madam Chair and Co-Chair Nicholas, no, we haven't really done that. We always hope that this $500,000 will at least keep us going when we get those cases. And I do have figures for what we've carried over and what's available to us now, and I can share that with you.
That's
if
what
you
I'd like
want
to see is what's there.
Right.
I mean, so how much of your $500,000 request is just for, is it primarily for training, or is it a backfill of that fund?
Madam Chair and Co-Chair Nicholas, it's both. It's both of those, right? And I think our carryover would enable us to, if we had a capital case trial now, we could likely get through that without asking for more funding. But as we've said in our narrative, I think it was fiscal year 11, 12, we paid on 13 or 15 cases, 13 to 15 capital cases at the same time, and we ran out of money. So that's always a fear, but it's up to the prosecutors to decide what to do, and we just have to deal with it.
Senator Salazar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As one of the non-attorneys here, thank you for your office. Thank you for what you do. I appreciate it.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, Senator Salazar.
All right. Any final questions for the Public Defender's Office? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. Good luck with the work you have to do.
Thanks. Okay, do we have anything from Mr. Richards? Do we have anything, Mr. Richards, to wrap up today?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will send out a very short email for today. We only have 2 follow-ups, I believe, to respond to. Looking forward to tomorrow, and also to put kind of your thinking ahead. You have the enterprise agencies, in my opinion, things that affect all of state government, and then one small agency that we just slipped in due to available time. So the enterprise agencies include the Wyoming Retirement System, and to note, you have 2 pending bills. Both of those bills will be taken up in January, not during their budget hearing. Then you're followed by the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust. That's the small agency we slipped in. And to round out the morning is the Department of Administration and Information. I believe all of the boards will have some representation, whether it is from ANI or the commission itself, in the afternoon. There is a small subset of boards and commissions that actually have any exception requests. Nonetheless, if you have questions of their standard budget, I believe the Department of Administration and Information or representatives from the licensing boards will be available. The balance of the afternoon is to discuss the State Construction Department, both in Agency 027 and 227, and not including K-12. So the vast majority of Agency 27 is K-12 related. The school facilities, that is postponed for a later date. And then to finish up the day, and you will see this is one of the rare days where we anticipate going beyond 5 o'clock, maybe not, but you'll see a 6 p.m. adjournment. You do have major maintenance legislation, which Representative Larson has taken a lead on since your October meeting. And I believe that warrants, some discussion and potential markup at that time.
Or just call the question. Can you
Uh,
repeat that,
State capital construction.
We're still on the record, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're still live.
227, is that the state capital construction budget packet and would then turn into a capital construction bill? Is that correct?
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, that is the basis of that legislation. We typically, or the committee typically does not mark that up until January. But that entire book of 227 typically becomes a standalone legislation. Thinking ahead, the other half of 27, which is school capital construction, you have a choice. The Constitution is written differently when it comes to K-12. So the K-12 capital construction can either be a Section 313 in the budget bill. It can be a standalone bill. And for the committee's background, the Select Committee has already voted to sponsor a standalone bill. Maybe it won't be the vehicle that the legislature chooses to use, or you could incorporate it with the state capital construction. So you have some options on where you want to place the K-12.
Thank you, Mr. Richards.